A hungry boy finds a lost credit card on the street and decides to return it to its owner, one of the richest businessmen in the city. Moved by the boy's attitude, the millionaire tells him, "Buy whatever you want." Meanwhile, the businessman's son, who had previously looked down on the boy, is sent to spend 24 hours living on the streets. What happens next will shock you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Fifth Avenue as Tommy shuffled between the hurried legs of business people and tourists. His small frame, wrapped in an oversized jacket that had seen better days, moved with practiced agility through the crowd. At 10 years old, he had already mastered the art of being invisible when necessary and noticed when useful. His father, James, watched from a distance, pride mixing with worry in his weathered face. They had been on the streets for 3 years now, ever since the company's bankruptcy had taken everything from them. Everything except their dignity and their bond, which seemed to grow stronger with each hardship they faced. Tommy's stomach growled as he caught the aroma of fresh bagels wafting from a nearby cafe. He pushed the hunger aside, focusing instead on collecting recyclables from the pristine trash bins that lined the street. This was their morning routine, father and son, separated by half a block, working in tandem to survive another day. The early autumn wind carried a hint of the approaching winter, making Tommy pull his thin jacket closer. As he approached another bin, something caught his eye. A flash of gold against the grey concrete. Bending down, he discovered a credit card, its surface gleaming with an unmistakable air of luxury. His heart began to race as he read the name, embossed in elegant script, Alexander Sterling III. Even Tommy, who had spent the last few years on the streets, knew that name. Sterling Enterprises owned half the skyscrapers in the financial district, and their CEO was famous for his extravagant lifestyle and philanthropic gestures. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Tommy's fingers traced the raised numbers on the card, his mind wandering to the possibilities it represented. A hot meal at the diner they passed every day, new shoes to replace his worn-out sneakers, maybe even a warm room for him and his father to sleep in, just for one night. The temptation wrapped around his thoughts like a warm blanket. But then, his father's words echoed in his mind. Integrity isn't something you can buy back once you've sold it. James had repeated this lesson countless times, even on their coldest and hungriest nights. Tommy glanced toward his father, who was carefully sorting through recyclables across the street. James caught his son's eye and gave him a small wave, his smile visible even from a distance. That smile carried years of sacrifices, of choosing right over easy, of teaching Tommy that their circumstances didn't define their character. With trembling fingers, Tommy slipped the card into his jacket pocket, not to use it, but to return it. He crossed the street to his father, his steps quickening with purpose. "Dad," he said, reaching James's side, "I found something important." James straightened up, his tall frame casting a protective shadow over his son. Tommy pulled out the golden card, watching as his father's eyes widened in recognition. "That's Alexander Sterling's card," James whispered, taking in the implications. "Where did you find it?" "Near the coffee shop," Tommy replied, pointing back across the street. "We need to return it." James knelt down to meet his son's eyes, his expression serious. "You know what this card could buy us, right? A lot of people wouldn't blame us for—" "But we're not a lot of people," Tommy interrupted, his voice stronger than his years would suggest. "We're us." A proud smile spread across James's face as he squeezed Tommy's shoulder. "Yes, we are, and you're right. We need to return it." "But Sterling's office is on the other side of the city. It'll take us hours to walk there." Tommy squared his shoulders, already preparing for the long journey ahead. "Then we better start walking." As they began their trek across the city, neither father nor son noticed the sleek black car parked across the street, or its tinted windows that concealed the very man whose card they carried. Alexander Sterling leaned forward in his leather seat, intrigued by the scene he had just witnessed, through his car's window. "Sir?" his driver questioned, waiting for instructions. "Follow them," Sterling commanded softly, his eyes fixed on the father and son as they walked away. "But keep your distance. I want to see what they do next." The morning traffic began to build as Tommy and James made their way through the awakening city. their path taking them through neighborhoods that grew progressively more affluent. Neither of them could have guessed that this simple act of honesty was about to change not only their lives, but the lives of everyone involved in ways they couldn't imagine. The streets grew wider and cleaner as Tommy and James made their way uptown. Glass and steel towers reached toward the clouds, their reflective surfaces creating a maze of light and shadow. Tommy's feet ached in his worn sneakers, but he pressed on, drawing strength from his father's steady presence beside him. They passed restaurants where people sat at outdoor tables, sipping coffee and picking at elaborate breakfast plates. Tommy tried not to stare, but the sight of food made his empty stomach contract painfully. James noticed his son's discomfort and reached into his pocket, pulling out their last granola bar, saved for emergencies. "Here," he said, breaking it in half. "We need to keep our strength up." Tommy accepted his portion gratefully, but instead of eating it immediately, he broke his half again and offered part back to his father. "You need strength too, Dad." A group of well-dressed business people passed by, giving them a wide berth and disapproving glances. James squared his shoulders, keeping his head high. He had learned long ago that dignity had nothing to do with the clothes you wore or the money you had. As they walked, Tommy began to notice something strange. The same black car seemed to appear on different streets they passed through, always keeping a discreet distance. He dismissed it as coincidence at first, but after the fourth sighting he tugged on his father's sleeve. "Dad," he whispered, "I think someone's following us." James had noticed too, his protective instincts on high alert, but rather than showing his concern, he gave Tommy's shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "Then we'll give them something worth following. Two people doing the right thing." They approached the Sterling Tower, its imposing height making Tommy feel smaller than ever. The entrance was a wall of glass and polished marble, staffed by security guards in crisp uniforms. James hesitated for the first time since they began their journey. "Maybe we should try to find a side entrance," he suggested, eyeing the revolving doors uncertainly. But before they could decide, the mysterious black car pulled up to the curb beside them. The back door opened, and Alexander Sterling himself stepped out, his expensive suit a stark contrast to their worn clothing. "I believe," he said with a slight smile, "you have something that belongs to me." Tommy and James stood frozen, surprised by this unexpected development. Sterling's expression was unreadable as he studied them, his eyes lingering on Tommy's determined face and James's protective stance. "Sir," James began, but Sterling held up a hand. "I've been watching you both all morning," he revealed, glancing at his driver, who nodded in confirmation. "I saw where you found my card, young man. I saw your struggle with the decision, and I saw you choose integrity over necessity." Tommy reached into his pocket with trembling fingers and held out the golden card. Sterling accepted it, turning it over in his hands thoughtfully. "Do you know why I followed you instead of just stopping you right away?" he asked, directing his question to Tommy. Tommy shook his head, unconsciously stepping closer to his father. "Because character isn't about doing the right thing when someone's watching," Sterling continued. "Here it's about doing the right thing even when you think no one will ever know. You didn't know I was following you. You didn't know if you'd even be allowed into this building to return the card. Yet you walked across the city anyway, on an empty stomach, because it was the right thing to do." Sterling's eyes moved to James. "You've taught your son well." "He teaches me too," James replied quietly, his hand resting on Tommy's shoulder. A crowd of employees had gathered in the lobby, watching through the glass walls with curious expressions. Among them was Marcus Sterling, Alexander's son, his designer suit and perfectly styled hair marking him as someone who had never known a day of want in his life. Alexander Sterling looked at his card one last time before making a decision that would set in motion a chain of events none of them could have predicted. He held the card back out to Tommy, who stared at it in confusion. "Take it," Sterling said, his voice firm but kind. "You've earned the right to use it." Tommy stared at the golden card being offered to him once again, his mind racing with conflicting emotions. The crowd in the lobby had grown larger, their faces pressed against the glass like spectators at an aquarium. Among them, Marcus Sterling's expression had shifted from mild curiosity to obvious disdain. "Father," Marcus called out, pushing through the revolving doors to join them on the sidewalk. "You can't be serious. This is clearly some kind of scheme. They probably planned this whole thing." James tensed beside Tommy, but kept his dignity intact. He had faced worse judgment during their years on the street, and his son's presence always reminded him to choose his reactions carefully. "Marcus," Alexander Sterling warned, his voice carrying a sharp edge that made his son step back slightly. "Sometimes the best way to judge character is to offer someone everything they want and see what they do with it." Tommy's small hand reached out slowly, not toward the card, but toward his father's larger one. The gesture wasn't lost on Alexander, whose eyes softened as he watched the silent exchange of trust between father and son. "Sir," James spoke carefully, "we appreciate your offer, but we didn't return your card expecting anything in return." "Exactly why you deserve it," Sterling replied, still holding out the card. "Take it, Tommy. Buy whatever you want. The only condition is that you have to tell me why you choose what you choose." Marcus scoffed, pulling out his phone to record the scene. "This will be interesting. Let's see what street rats do with unlimited credit." The cruel words hung in the air, but instead of anger, Tommy felt something else: pity. He remembered a woman they'd met in the shelter last winter, who'd once been wealthy before losing everything. She had told him that being rich wasn't about having money, but about what you did with it. Taking a deep breath, Tommy stepped forward and accepted the card. The gold surface felt heavy with responsibility in his small hands. He looked up at Alexander Sterling, then at Marcus, who was still recording with a smirk on his face. "Can we use it right now?" Tommy asked, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Sterling nodded, gesturing toward his waiting car. "Of course. My driver can take you anywhere you'd like to go." Marcus stepped closer, his camera still rolling. "Let me guess. Toy stores. Maybe one of those fancy electronics shops, or straight to the nearest, the homeless shelter on 23rd Street. Tommy interrupted quietly. The phone in Marcus's hand wavered slightly. Even Alexander Sterling looked surprised by the choice. "The shelter?" Sterling repeated, making sure he'd heard correctly. Tommy nodded, squeezing his father's hand. "Yesterday, we met a man there, named Mr. Chen. He lost his job 3 months ago and hasn't been able to find work because his glasses broke and he can't afford new ones. He has interviews lined up, but he can't see well enough to read applications. He needed about $200 for new glasses, but none of the charities had funding available right now." James looked down at his son with pride, remembering how Tommy had shared their last sandwich with Mr. Chen the previous night. "And that's what you want to use the unlimited credit card for?" Marcus asked incredulously. "A pair of glasses for some homeless man?" "Not just that," Tommy continued, his confidence growing. "There's also Mrs. Rodriguez and her daughter. They've been sleeping in their car since they lost their apartment. She has a job offer, but she needs business clothes for the orientation next week. And there's Kevin. He's my age, but he can't go to school because they can't afford his school supplies. And uniform." Alexander Sterling's expression had transformed as Tommy spoke, a mix of amazement and something deeper, perhaps recognition of what true wealth looked like. He turned to his son, who had lowered his phone, the smirk gone from his face. "Marcus, why don't you join us?" Sterling suggested, though his tone made it clear it wasn't really a suggestion. "I think you might learn something valuable today." The driver opened the car's doors, and Tommy hesitated for a moment before climbing in, still holding his father's hand. The leather seats were softer than any bed they'd slept in for years, but Tommy's mind wasn't on the luxury surrounding him. He was already making mental lists of all the people they could help. As the car pulled away from the curb, Marcus sat stiffly in his seat, trying to maintain his air of superiority, despite the obvious discomfort of having his worldview challenged. He watched as Tommy leaned forward to give the driver directions to the shelter, speaking with a quiet authority that seemed far beyond his years. What none of them realized was that this day would mark the beginning of a transformation that would ripple through their lives in unexpected ways. The golden credit card wasn't just a test of character. It was about to become a catalyst for change that would challenge everything they thought they knew about wealth, worth, and what it truly means to be rich. The shelter on 23rd Street looked nothing like the gleaming towers they'd left behind. Its brick walls were weathered, and the windows had seen better days, but to Tommy, it was a place of hope. He'd learned that sometimes the most beautiful things happened in the most unexpected places. As they entered, the familiar scent of industrial cleaner and donated soup filled the air. Marcus wrinkled his nose, unconsciously stepping closer to his father. The shelter's regular inhabitants looked up with surprise at the unusual sight of designer suits in their midst. Mr. Chen was sitting at his usual corner table, squinting at a newspaper through his broken glasses. When Tommy approached, the elderly man's face lit up with recognition. "Tommy, James!" he called out, then noticed their companions and tried to straighten his worn jacket self-consciously. "Mr. Chen," Tommy said, his voice warm with genuine affection. "Remember what you told me about your interviews? Well, we're here to help." Alexander Sterling watched the interaction with growing interest. He'd seen countless business negotiations, but there was something pure about the way Tommy handled this moment. No pretense, no expectation of return, just simple human kindness. Marcus, meanwhile, stood awkwardly near the entrance, his expensive shoes careful to avoid any contact with the worn floor. But despite his obvious discomfort, he couldn't help but observe the scene unfolding before him. Tommy explained to Mr. Chen about the card and the offer to help. The elderly man's eyes welled with tears, but he shook his head. "I cannot accept such generosity, it's too much." "Sir," James stepped forward, "sometimes accepting help is as important as giving it. It allows others to experience the joy of giving." The wisdom in James's words seemed to touch something in Marcus. He found himself remembering all the times he'd carelessly swiped his own credit card without a second thought about its value or impact. An hour later, they were at an optometrist's office. Mr. Chen sat nervously in the examination chair, while Tommy held his worn jacket. The optometrist, initially suspicious of their unusual group, had warmed to them after Alexander Sterling explained the situation. "You know," Mr. Chen said while waiting for his new glasses to be prepared, "I was an accountant for 30 years before my company downsized. Never thought I'd end up in a shelter. Never thought a child would be the one to help. Me get back on my feet." Marcus shifted uncomfortably, thinking about the countless times he'd walked past people on the street without a second glance. His father noticed the change in his son's demeanor and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. When they returned to the shelter, Mrs. Rodriguez was there with her daughter, Eleanor. The little girl's face lit up when she saw Tommy, running to give him a hug, despite her mother's attempts to stop her. "Tommy," Elena exclaimed, "I got an A on my math homework. I did it in the car last night with the flashlight you gave me." Marcus watched as Tommy celebrated Elena's achievement as if it was the most important news in the world. Something stirred in his chest, a feeling he couldn't quite identify. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of activity. They took Mrs. Rodriguez to buy professional clothing for her new job, helped Kevin get his school supplies, and arranged for several families to receive grocery deliveries. With each act of kindness, the atmosphere in the shelter shifted from guarded suspicion to cautious hope. But it was during a quiet moment, watching Tommy help Elena pick out a new backpack for school, that Marcus finally understood what his father had been trying to teach him. Wealth wasn't just about the ability to buy things, it was about the power to make a difference in people's lives. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the shelter's windows, Alexander Sterling pulled James aside for a private conversation. Tommy was still busy helping others, his energy seemingly limitless despite the long day. "Your son," Sterling began, choosing his words carefully, "he's taught me more about wealth today than 20 years in the business world." James watched Tommy with pride. He's always been able to see the real value in things, not their price but their worth. Marcus overheard their conversation and found himself walking toward Tommy, who was saying goodbye to Elena and her mother. For the first time in his life, he felt genuinely uncomfortable with his own privilege, not out of guilt but because he realized how little he'd done with it. "Tommy," he said, his voice lacking its earlier arrogance, "I think I owe you an apology." The simple statement hung in the air between them, marking the beginning of what would become an unexpected friendship and an even more unexpected journey of transformation for everyone involved. As they left the shelter that evening, Alexander, Sterling made an unexpected proposal. He offered Tommy and James temporary accommodation in one of his company's corporate apartments while they continued their mission of helping others. The offer came with no strings attached, just a safe place to sleep and clean up between their charitable activities. "You understand," Sterling said, looking at James, "that this isn't charity. Consider it an investment in your son's vision of helping others." James hesitated, years of independence making him wary of accepting such generosity. But one look at Tommy's exhausted face made the decision easier. A proper night's sleep would help them help others more effectively. The apartment was modest, by Sterling standards, but felt like a palace to Tommy and James. Clean sheets, hot water, and a fully stocked kitchen, simple luxuries they hadn't experienced in years. Tommy stood at the window, looking out over the city lights, his mind already planning tomorrow's activities. "Dad," he said quietly, "do you think Mom would be proud of what we're doing?" The question caught James off guard. They rarely spoke. About Sarah, Tommy's mother, who had disappeared from their lives years ago just before their financial troubles began. The pain of her absence was a wound they both carried silently. "She would be more than proud," James replied, joining his son at the window. "She always said you had a special heart." What neither of them knew was that their sudden visibility in the city's charitable circles had caught someone's attention. In a small apartment across town, a woman named Clara Martinez sat at her computer, staring at a news article about the mysterious father and son who were helping the homeless with a golden credit card. The photo accompanying the article made her hands tremble. She would recognize James anywhere, even after all these years. And the boy. He had Sarah's eyes. Clara had been Sarah's best friend and confidant during those final troubled months before she disappeared. She alone knew the truth about why Sarah had left, and the secret she'd made Clara promise to keep until the right moment. Meanwhile, Marcus Sterling was having trouble sleeping in his luxury penthouse. The day's events kept replaying in his mind, particularly the moment when Elena had shown Tommy her math homework. He remembered being Elena's age, showing his own achievements to a disinterested father who was too busy building his empire. Unable to rest, Marcus opened his laptop and began researching homeless statistics in the city. The numbers were staggering, but what caught his attention were the stories behind them. Stories of people like Mr. Chen, who had fallen through society's cracks despite a lifetime of hard work. The next morning, Tommy woke early, still amazed by the comfort of sleeping in a real bed. He found James already awake, making breakfast in the kitchen, another simple pleasure they hadn't enjoyed in years. "I've been thinking," Tommy said, helping himself to some toast, "about starting a program to help homeless kids stay in school. Like Kevin, there must be lots of others like him." James smiled at his son's endless capacity for thinking of others even after their own circumstances had improved. "That's a wonderful idea, but remember, you don't have to solve everything at once." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. It was Marcus, looking surprisingly casual in jeans and a simple shirt, holding a laptop under his arm. "I couldn't sleep," he announced, walking in. "I've been doing research. Did you know that over 60% of homeless families in our city have at least one working parent? They're not lazy. They're just caught in impossible situations." Tommy noticed the dark circles under Marcus's eyes and the intense look on his face. It was the same expression he'd seen countless times on the streets. The moment someone's worldview shifted permanently. "I want to help," Marcus continued, opening his laptop. "Not just with money, but really help. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday about Mr. Chen needing new glasses. What if we created a program specifically for helping people maintain their professional appearances for job interviews?" As Marcus shared his ideas, Tommy felt a warm glow of satisfaction. The golden credit card was doing more than just helping people with immediate needs. It was changing hearts. But their morning planning session was interrupted by another knock. This time, when James opened the door, he found Alexander Sterling standing there with Clara Martinez. The look on Clara's face made James step back in surprise. "James," Clara said softly, "we need to talk. It's about Sarah." The name hung in the air like a physical presence. Tommy moved closer to his father, while Marcus and Alexander exchanged confused glances. None of them could have guessed that the next few minutes would reveal a truth that had been buried for years, a truth that would test the bonds between father and son in ways they never expected. Clara clutched her purse tightly, her knuckles white with tension. The secret she had carried for so long was about to change everything. But as she looked at Tommy's concerned face, so much like his mother's, she knew it was finally time for the truth to come out. The corporate apartment's living room felt too small for the weight of the moment. Clara sat perched on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. James stood by the window, his usual calm demeanor showing cracks of anxiety. Tommy sat between Marcus and Alexander, who had chosen to stay despite the personal nature of the conversation. "Before I tell you everything," Clara began, her voice trembling slightly, "you need to know that Sarah loved you both more than anything. Everything she did to protect Tommy." James's shoulders tensed. Protect him from what? Clara reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, yellowed with age. "Sarah left this with me 10 years ago, making me promise to keep it safe until I felt the time was right. When I saw the news about what you're doing with the credit card, about how Tommy is helping others, I knew it was time." Tommy watched as his father accepted the envelope with shaking hands. The paper crackled as James unfolded a handwritten letter, Sarah's familiar handwriting flowing across the page. "My dearest James and Tommy," James read aloud, his voice growing hoarse. "If you're reading this, then Clara has decided it's finally safe to tell you the truth. I didn't abandon you. I left to protect you both." Marcus shifted uncomfortably, feeling like an intruder in this intimate moment, but Tommy's small hand gripped his arm, keeping him in place. Alexander watched his son's reaction with quiet approval. "The company's bankruptcy wasn't an accident," James continued reading. "I discovered evidence of serious financial misconduct involving some of the board members. They were embezzling money, using the company as a front for something much bigger. When I threatened to expose them, they made it clear that my family would suffer the consequences." Tommy's grip on Marcus's arm tightened. All these years they'd thought the bankruptcy was just bad luck, just another story of corporate failure. "I couldn't bear the thought of anything happening to you or Tommy," Sarah's letter continued. "So I made a deal. I would disappear with the evidence, and they would leave you both alone. The bankruptcy was inevitable by then, but at least you would be safe." James sank into a chair, the letter trembling in his hands. "Why didn't she tell me? We could have fought them together." Clara leaned forward. "They were watching you both. Any suspicious move would have triggered their response. Sarah knew that if you were aware of the truth, you would have tried to fight back. She needed your reactions to be genuine." "The evidence," Alexander Sterling interrupted, his business mind-engaging. "Did Sarah preserve it?" Clara nodded. "She entrusted everything to me, documents, recordings, financial records. I've kept them hidden all these years, waiting for the right moment. When I saw Tommy and James in the news, I did some research. The people behind the embezzlement scheme are still out there, still operating under different company names." Marcus sat up straighter. "Dad, we have to do something. Your legal team could—" "It's not that simple," Clara cut in. "These people are powerful, connected. They've buried their tracks well over the years." Tommy, who had been quietly processing everything, suddenly spoke up. "But we have something they don't expect." Everyone turned to look at him. "We have the golden card," Tommy explained, his young face serious. "And we've been using it to help people, creating a network of trust. Mr. Chen was an accountant. Mrs. Rodriguez worked in corporate filing. Kevin's mom was a legal secretary. What if they're not just people we're helping, but people who could help us understand the evidence?" Alexander Sterling's expression shifted from concern to admiration. "The boy's right. A community united is stronger than any corporate conspiracy." James stared at his son, seeing Sarah's strategic mind shining through. "Tommy, this could be dangerous. These people—" "Dad," Tommy interrupted gently. "Mom protected us by leaving. Maybe we can honor her by fighting back the right way. Not with violence or threats, but by building something stronger than their greed." Marcus looked at Tommy with new respect. "I'll help. My father's resources, combined with the evidence." And the people you've been helping. We could expose everything. Clara pulled another envelope from her purse. There's something else you should know. Sarah didn't just leave evidence about the financial crimes. She left proof of something that could change everything for you and Tommy, James. Something about Tommy's true identity. The room fell silent as Clara held out the second envelope. Tommy stood up, moving to his father's side. Whatever was in that envelope, they would face it together, just as they had faced every other challenge life had thrown at them. James looked at his son, seeing both Sarah's strength and his own determination reflected in those young eyes. With a deep breath, he reached for the envelope, knowing that their lives were about to change once again. The second envelope contained a single photograph and a DNA test result. James stared at them, his hands trembling as he processed their meaning. The photograph showed Sarah in a hospital bed, holding a newborn Tommy, but it was the man standing beside her that made his heart stop. It was himself, 10 years younger, in a business suit he remembered wearing to board meetings. "I don't understand," James whispered, looking at Clara. "This photo, I have no memory of it." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Because they took that memory from you, James. The night before the company's collapse, they made sure you wouldn't remember certain things. Sarah knew they would try to use Tommy against you, so she protected both of you the only way she could." Tommy pressed closer to his father, trying to make sense of it all. "What does this mean?" "It means," Clara said softly, "that James isn't just the man who raised you, Tommy. He's your biological father. The DNA test proves it. Sarah had it done in secret, knowing someday you'd both need to know the truth." The revelation settled over the room like a warm blanket. Tommy looked up at James, seeing him with new eyes, yet realizing that nothing had really changed. The man who had sacrificed everything to keep him safe, who had taught him about integrity and kindness, had been his father in every way that mattered all along. Alexander Sterling watched the scene with unexpected emotion. "This changes everything," he said, his business voice softened by compassion. "Those people didn't just steal your company and your memories, James. They tried to erase your entire identity as a father." Marcus, who had been quietly observing, suddenly stood up. "We need to protect them," he declared, looking at his own father. "Dad, we can't let them know we're investigating until we're ready to expose everything." "Agreed," Alexander nodded. "But we need to move carefully. Tommy's charitable work with the credit card has already drawn attention. We need to make it look like nothing more than what it appears. A simple story of kindness going viral." James pulled Tommy into a tight embrace, years of unspoken love flowing between them. "All this time," he murmured, "I thought I was protecting you because it was the right thing to do. But my heart knew. Somehow my heart always knew you were mine." Clara wiped her eyes, watching father and son. "Sarah would be so proud of you both. She always said that love was stronger than any force trying to tear it apart." Tommy suddenly remembered something. "The people at the shelter, we need to protect them too. If these bad people find out we're working with them..." "Already ahead of you," Marcus chimed in, pulling out his phone. "I've been making some calls. Dad's company has several empty office buildings that were scheduled for renovation. We can convert them into temporary housing and job training centers, move everyone from the shelter into more secure locations while we work on exposing the truth." Alexander raised an eyebrow at his son's initiative. The change in Marcus over the past few days was remarkable. The entitled young man who had scoffed at Tommy's kindness was transforming into someone who understood the true value of wealth and power, the ability to protect and uplift others. "There's more," Clara added, reaching into her bag one final time. Sarah left a series of coded messages about where to find additional evidence. She scattered it across the city in various locations, each piece meaningless on its own, but devastating when combined. James looked at the complex series of numbers and symbols. "I recognize this code," he said slowly, memories flickering at the edges of his consciousness. "We used to create puzzles together, Sarah and I. She knew that even if they took my memories, they couldn't erase the patterns we'd created together. Tommy studied the coded message with intense concentration. "Look, Dad, some of these numbers match the addresses of places we've been staying on the streets. Mom must have known we'd end up visiting these locations eventually." "She was always 10 steps ahead," James said softly, pride mixing with sadness in his voice. "Even now she's helping us find our way." Alexander Sterling checked his watch. "It's getting late. You'll both stay here tonight. It's secure, and I have trusted security personnel watching the building. Tomorrow we'll begin implementing Marcus's relocation plan for the shelter residents and start working on decoding Sarah's messages." As everyone prepared to leave, Tommy tugged on Marcus's sleeve. "Thank you," he said simply, "for wanting to help protect everyone." Marcus knelt down to Tommy's level. "You know what? I should be thanking you. You taught me that real strength isn't about having power over others. It's about using whatever power you have to help them." Clara gathered her belongings, promising to return the next day with more of Sarah's documents. As she reached the door, she turned back to look at Tommy and James, still wrapped in their embrace. "Sarah used to say that love leaves breadcrumbs," she said softly. "Little trails of truth that lead us back to who we really are. You two found each other long before you knew the truth, because love always finds its way home." As the door closed behind their visitors, Tommy and James stood at the window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Sarah's careful. Plans were waiting to be discovered. But for now, the simple truth of their bond, both chosen and biological, was enough. "Dad," Tommy said quietly. "Yes, son? I think I know what to do next with the golden card." James looked down at his son in every possible way, and saw the same determination that had first drawn them together on the streets. "What's that?" "We're going to help people find their way home too." The next morning dawned bright and clear, bringing with it a renewed sense of purpose. Tommy and James arrived early at Sterling Tower, where they found Marcus already setting up a makeshift command center in one of the conference rooms. Multiple laptops displayed maps of the city, with red pins marking the locations from Sarah's coded messages. "I hope you don't mind," Marcus said somewhat sheepishly. "I couldn't sleep, so I started plotting the coordinates. There's definitely a pattern here, but I can't quite figure it out." Tommy approached the largest screen, his eyes scanning the key app. "These aren't just random locations," he said excitedly. "Look, they form a perfect circle around the old financial district. Mom was telling us where to look." Alexander Sterling entered the room, followed by Clara and a distinguished-looking woman in a crisp suit. "This is Patricia Chen," Alexander introduced. "Mr. Chen's daughter and, as it happens, one of the city's top real estate lawyers." "When Dad told me about your situation," Patricia said, placing her briefcase on the conference table, "I knew I had to help. I've spent years tracking suspicious property acquisitions in the financial district. There's been a pattern of small businesses being forced out, properties changing hands through shell companies." "Just like what happened to our company," James interjected, memories stirring. Patricia nodded. "Exactly. But here's the interesting part. All these transactions have one thing in common. They all involve properties that once belonged to Sterling Enterprises." Alexander's expression darkened. "Properties I was pressured to sell during the financial crisis. Properties that Sarah might have been investigating." Tommy, who had been quietly studying the map, suddenly pointed to a cluster of pins. "These locations, they're all places where homeless people gather. Places where people go when they have nowhere else to turn." Marcus leaned in, understanding dawning on his face. "They've been using the properties to hide their paper trail. Who would think to look for financial records in abandoned buildings? But Sarah would," Clara said softly. "She knew that someday someone would need to connect all the dots." James approached the map, touching one of the locations. "The old warehouse on Pike Street. Tommy and I stayed there last winter. There was something odd about the basement, but we never investigated." "Because you weren't meant to," Patricia explained. "These locations were chosen specifically because homeless people would naturally avoid certain areas of the buildings. Perfect hiding spots for sensitive documents." Alexander Sterling pulled out his phone. "I'm calling in a team of trusted investigators. We'll need to search these locations carefully without tipping our hand." "No," Tommy said firmly, surprising everyone. "We need to do this differently." All eyes turned to the young boy who stood his ground with quiet confidence. "The golden card," Tommy continued, "it's not just about helping people anymore, it's about building trust. What if we use it to create community centers in these locations? Real ones, not just temporary shelters. Places where people can get job training, medical care, education." Marcus caught on immediately. "While we secretly search the buildings." "Tommy, that's brilliant. No one would suspect a charitable initiative of being an investigation." "And," Tommy added, his eyes shining, "we'd be helping people for real, not just using them as cover. Mum would want that." Alexander Sterling looked at his son and Tommy with pride. 2 weeks ago, I would have approached this like a business takeover. But you boys have shown me there's a better way. Patricia, can your firm handle the legal work for establishing these community centers?" Patricia smiled. "Already working on it. And Dad's got a network of former accountants and business professionals who lost everything in similar schemes. They're ready to help with both the community programs and the investigation." Clara opened her laptop, revealing a spreadsheet. "I've been organizing Sarah's notes. She left detailed instructions about what to look for in each location. Some of the evidence is physical, documents and recordings, but some is digital, hidden in old computer systems that were never completely wiped." James watched his son moving between the adults, contributing ideas and showing wisdom far beyond his years. The truth about their biological connection had only confirmed what his heart had always known. Tommy was meant to be his son in every way that mattered. "We'll need to move quickly," Alexander cautioned. "Once we start establishing these centers, they'll notice something's happening." "Let them notice," Marcus said with newfound determination. "They'll just see a bunch of rich people trying to help the homeless. It's the perfect cover, hiding in plain sight by doing actual good." Tommy pulled out the golden credit card, which seemed to gleam with new purpose in the morning light. "Mom left us breadcrumbs," he said, remembering Clara's words. "Now we're going to leave something too, hope." As they began planning the details of their operation, none of them could have predicted how their actions would ripple through the city, touching lives far beyond their immediate circle. The golden card, intended as a test of character, was becoming something much more powerful, a catalyst for justice, healing, and transformation. But even as they worked, cameras hidden in nearby buildings recorded their movements, transmitting images to a darkened office where a group of worried executives watched their carefully constructed world begin to unravel, one act of kindness at a time. The first community center opened its doors just 3 days later in the renovated Pike Street warehouse. The transformation was remarkable. What had once been a cold, abandoned space now hummed with life and purpose. The main floor housed a job training center, while the upper levels offered temporary housing for families in transition. Tommy stood in the entrance, greeting each person who came through the doors. He remembered many of them from his time on the streets, and the joy in their faces as they entered the warm, welcoming space made his heart swell with pride. "Young man," called Mrs. Peterson, an elderly woman he recognized from the shelter, "I never thought I'd see the day when someone would give us a chance like this." She clutched a folder containing her resume, newly updated with help from the center's career counselors. Marcus, who had taken charge of the center's operations, worked alongside the volunteers with rolled-up sleeves and determination in his eyes. The entitled young man who had once looked down on the homeless was gone, replaced by someone who understood the true meaning of privilege and responsibility. "Tommy," Marcus called out, waving him over to a corner where Mr. Chen was setting up a computer lab. "We found something interesting while renovating the basement." They made their way downstairs, where Patricia Chen was examining a false wall panel they had discovered during the renovations. Behind it, they found a stack of old ledgers and a corrupted hard drive, exactly where Sarah's notes had suggested they would be. "Mom knew," Tommy whispered, running his fingers over the dusty books. "She knew someone would find these eventually." James joined them, carrying a box of supplies for the computer lab. His eyes lingered on the hidden compartment, memories stirring just beneath the surface. "I remember this building," he said slowly. "Before everything happened, this was where we stored our company's backup files." Patricia carefully placed the ledgers and hard drive into a secure container. We'll need to examine these carefully. My team's already found similar caches in 2 other locations. The pattern matches what Sarah documented. Meanwhile, upstairs, Alexander Sterling was giving a tour to a group of reporters. The media had caught wind of the mysterious charitable initiative and the story of a wealthy businessman and his son working alongside a former homeless child to help the community had captured the public's imagination. "This is just the beginning," Alexander told the cameras, careful to maintain the appearance of a simple philanthropic venture. "We plan to open similar centers throughout the city, focusing on education, job training, and family support." What the reporters didn't see was Clara in a back office, meticulously copying data from the recovered files, while Mr. Chen's accounting expertise helped decode years of fraudulent transactions. Each document they uncovered added another piece to the puzzle Sarah had left behind. Tommy spent the afternoon helping Elena and other children with their homework in the center's new study area. The space was bright and cheerful, with donated computers and a small library. As he watched the children work, he couldn't help but think about how different his own life might have been if such a place had existed years ago. "You've created something beautiful here," said a soft voice behind him. Tommy turned to find Mrs. Rodriguez, now employed as the center's administrative assistant, her professional attire a far cry from the worn clothes she'd worn at the shelter. "We all did," Tommy corrected her, smiling at how she had organized the entire office system efficiently within days of starting her job. Later that evening, as the center quieted down, James found Tommy sitting by a window, watching the sunset paint the city in shades of gold and pink. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, settling beside his son. "I was just thinking about Mom," Tommy replied, "about how she left all these clues, knowing that someday we'd be ready to find them, but also about how she made sure we'd help people along the way." James wrapped an arm around Tommy's shoulders. "She always said that the best way to fight darkness was to create light. That's exactly what you're doing here." Their moment was interrupted by Marcus, who burst into the room with excitement in his eyes. "You need to see this," he said, holding up a partially restored file from the corrupted hard drive. "We found names, important names, people who were involved in the scheme." Tommy and James followed Marcus to the basement office, where Clara, Patricia, and Alexander were huddled around a computer screen. The names on the display made Alexander's face grow pale. "These are members of my own board," he said quietly. "People I trusted. They were part of this all along." "There's more," Patricia added, pointing to a series of transactions. "These patterns match perfectly with what we found in the other buildings. They weren't just stealing from one company. They were systematically targeting businesses throughout the financial district." Clara looked up from her notes. Sarah documented all of this. She was building a case piece by piece, but she needed to protect the evidence until someone could put it all together. Tommy studied the complex web of transactions displayed on the screen. All those people who lost their jobs, their homes. It wasn't just bad luck or bad business. These people did it on purpose. A security guard appeared at the door. "Mr. Sterling, there's someone here who says she has information about Sarah. She seems scared and she'll only talk to Tommy." Everyone exchanged worried glances. They had known their activities would eventually draw attention, but they hadn't expected it so soon. "I'll talk to her," Tommy said firmly, standing up straight, but not alone. As they made their way upstairs, none of them noticed the small red light blinking on one of the new security cameras, a light that shouldn't have been there. In a dark room across town, the same group of executives who had watched their earlier planning session now leaned forward, their faces tight with concern. Their carefully constructed world wasn't just unraveling, it was being systematically dismantled by a child with a golden credit card and a heart full of his mother's courage. The woman waiting in the center's reception area looked to be in her early 50s, with graying hair and hands that couldn't stop fidgeting with her worn purse. When she saw Tommy approach with James, Marcus, and Alexander, her eyes widened with recognition. "You look just like her," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Just like Sarah when she was young." Tommy felt his father's hand tighten protectively on his shoulder. Alexander stepped forward, his presence commanding but gentle. "I'm Alexander Sterling," "You're safe here. Please tell us what you know." The woman introduced herself as Rebecca Turner, a former secretary at Sterling Enterprises. "I worked there during the collapse," she explained, her eyes darting nervously to the windows. I helped Sarah hide some of the documents. I didn't know what they were at the time, but I knew they were important." James leaned forward. "You knew Sarah? You helped her?" Rebecca nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "She was kind to me when no one else was. When everything fell apart, I lost my job, my home, ended up on the streets myself for a while. But Sarah made sure I had a safe place to go first. She helped me start over in another city." "Why come forward now?" Marcus asked, his tone cautious but curious. "Because of what you're doing here?" Rebecca gestured to the community center. "I've been watching the news. When I saw Tommy using that golden card to help people, I knew Sarah's plan was finally working. She always said that someday love would find a way to bring the truth to light." Tommy listened intently as Rebecca explained how Sarah had orchestrated an intricate plan to protect not just the evidence, but also the people who helped her hide it. She had created a network of safe houses and support systems, ensuring that anyone who assisted her would have protection when needed. "There's something else," Rebecca said, reaching into her purse with shaking hands. She withdrew a small notebook, its pages yellow with age. "Sarah gave me this, made me promise to keep it hidden until I saw the sign she described, a golden card being used to help the homeless. She said when that happened, it would mean her family was ready." James accepted the notebook reverently, recognizing Sarah's handwriting immediately. As he flipped through the pages, his breath caught. "These aren't just notes," he said. "They're coordinates, security codes, access numbers to hidden accounts." She documented everything. Alexander studied the notebook over James's shoulder, his business acumen quickly grasping the implications. "With this, we can trace every transaction, every shell company, every person involved in the scheme." "But it's not complete," Rebecca warned. "This is just one piece. Sarah split everything up, gave different parts to different people. She said it was safer that way. No one person would have enough information to be targeted." Marcus, who had been quietly processing everything, suddenly straightened. "The community centers," he said excitedly. "That's why Mom wanted them in specific locations. Each center we open brings us closer to another person who has a piece of the puzzle." Tommy's mind raced with the possibilities. "And while we help people, we're also building a network of trust, just like Mum did." Rebecca smiled sadly. "Sarah would be so proud of you both. She hated having to leave, but she always believed that someday love would find a way to make things right." As they talked, Clara arrived with fresh coffee for everyone. She and Rebecca recognized each other immediately. They had both been part of Sarah's trusted circle, though neither had known the full extent of the other's involvement. "The notebook mentions someone named Eleanor," Clara said, scanning the pages. "She was Sarah's contact in the financial district." Rebecca's face paled. "Eleanor's still there, working as a janitor in one of the buildings. She's been watching, waiting for the right moment. She has the digital copies of all the transactions, the ones that prove who was really behind everything." James and Alexander exchanged meaningful looks. They were getting closer to the truth, but they also knew that their actions wouldn't go unnoticed much longer. The people who had orchestrated the original scheme were still out there, still powerful. Tommy, sensing the adult's concern, spoke up with determination. "We can't stop now. Mom left us these clues because she believed we could finish what she started. Not just exposing the truth, but helping people along the way." Marcus nodded in agreement. "He's right. Every person we help through these centers becomes part of something bigger, a community that protects its own." As they wrapped up their conversation with Rebecca, making arrangements for her safety, Tommy stood at the window watching the city lights come alive. The golden credit card in his pocket seemed to pulse with new purpose. It wasn't just a tool for charity anymore. It was a key unlocking doors to both justice and healing. What none of them could have known was that at that very moment Eleanor was preparing her own move. In the basement of a towering financial building, surrounded by the hum of servers, she waited for the sign she had been promised years ago. The time was coming to reveal the final piece of Sarah's puzzle, a piece that would shake the city's financial district to its very foundation. The next few days brought a whirlwind of activity to the Pike Street Centre. New faces appeared, daily each carrying pieces of Sarah's carefully woven plan. Former employees, displaced families, and people who had lost everything in the financial collapse began sharing their stories, drawn by the news of Tommy's Golden Card initiative. Tommy spent his mornings helping with the centre's programs and his afternoons working with Clara and Patricia to piece together the growing web of information. The wall of their basement office had become a complex tapestry of photos, documents, and connecting threads, a visual representation of Sarah's master plan. "Look at this pattern," Patricia said one morning, tracing a series of transactions on the wall. Every time they targeted a company, they also manipulated property values in the surrounding area. They weren't just stealing money, they were reshaping entire neighborhoods. Marcus, who had developed a keen eye for detail during their investigation, pointed to a cluster of dates. These matched the timeline when families started getting displaced. They created the homeless crisis on purpose to hide their tracks in plain sight. Because who would suspect, Tommy added quietly, that the people sleeping in abandoned buildings were actually guarding the evidence of their crimes? Alexander Sterling had transformed his corporate boardroom into a command center for their operation. Maps of the city covered the walls, with red pins marking confirmed evidence locations and blue pins indicating potential allies. The network Sarah had built was vast, reaching into every corner of the financial district. "Eleanor's the key," James said, studying the building plans where she worked as a janitor. "But we need to be careful how we approach her. If the wrong people notice..." "Guy, they're already noticing," Clara interrupted, entering the room with a stack of newspapers. The headlines told the story. "Mystery philanthropists transform city's homeless services. Golden Card campaign spreads hope. Sterling Enterprises leads community revival." "Good," Tommy said firmly. "Let them see what we want them to see. Mom always said the best hiding place is in plain sight." Rebecca had begun working at the center, her administrative skills proving invaluable as they coordinated their growing network of allies. She was currently helping Mrs. Rodriguez organize a job fair that would bring together former professionals who had lost everything in the financial scheme. "Each person we help," Rebecca explained to a group of new volunteers, "becomes part of our safety net. We're not just giving people jobs, we're rebuilding a community that can protect itself." That afternoon, Tommy found himself sitting with Elena in the center's study area, helping her with her homework. The young girl had become a regular presence, her mother's new job at the center, providing stability they hadn't known in years. "Tommy," Elena said suddenly, looking up from her math problems, "my mum says you're helping people find their way home. Is that true?" Tommy thought carefully about his answer. "Sometimes home isn't a place," he said finally. "Sometimes it's the people who stand by you, who help you be brave when things are scary." "Like your mum did?" Elena asked innocently. "Yeah," Tommy smiled, thinking of Sarah's intricate plan. "Exactly like that." The conversation was interrupted by Marcus, who burst into the room with excitement in his eyes. "We found Eleanor," he announced breathlessly. "Or rather, she found us. She left a message in the system, old code that Sarah taught her. She wants to meet." The adults gathered quickly in the basement office. Eleanor's message was brief but clear. She had maintained her position as a janitor all these years, slowly gathering digital evidence from the building's servers, but now she needed help to retrieve it safely. "The servers are in a secure room," Eleanor's message explained. "I can access it during my cleaning rounds, but I need a distraction, big enough to keep security occupied while I download everything." Alexander studied the building plans. "We could schedule a major event, something that would require security's full attention." "The job fair," Tommy suggested suddenly. "We were already planning it. What if we hold it in the building where Eleanor works? The Golden Card initiative is getting so much attention, they couldn't refuse without looking suspicious." Marcus caught on immediately. "A job fair for former financial district employees? It's perfect. They'd have to participate to maintain their public image." And with so many people moving through the building, Patricia added, Eleanor would have the cover she needs. James looked at his son with pride. You're thinking just like your mother. She always found ways to turn their own image against them. As they began planning the details of the job fair, Tommy felt a familiar warmth in his pocket, the golden credit card that had started everything. What had begun as a simple test of character had grown into something far more powerful, a tool for justice, healing, and redemption. That evening, as the center quieted down, Tommy and James stood at the window of their temporary apartment, watching the city lights flicker like stars. The financial district loomed in the distance, its towers reaching into the darkening sky. Are you scared, Dad? Tommy asked softly. James considered the question carefully. Not of them, he answered finally. I'm scared of not finishing what your mother started, of letting down all the people who've trusted us with their stories. Tommy slipped his small hand into his father's larger one. Mom didn't trust us with just her plan, he said wisely. She trusted us with her hope, and hope is stronger than fear. As they stood there, father and son united by blood and choice, neither could have known that across the city, Eleanor was making her own preparations. In the quiet hours of her night shift, she moved through empty offices like a ghost, carefully, laying the groundwork for what would become their biggest revelation yet. The pieces were falling into place, just as Sarah had planned. But the final moves in this intricate game would require more than just careful planning. They would demand the kind of courage that only comes from fighting for something bigger than yourself. The preparations for the job fair consumed the next week. The Pike Street Center buzzed with activity as volunteers coordinated with other community centers they'd opened across the city. Tommy watched in amazement as their network of allies grew stronger each day. Mr. Chen had taken charge of preparing the job seekers, his years of professional experience proving invaluable. In the center's computer lab, he coached former executives and office workers who had lost everything, helping them update resumes and practice interview skills. Remember, he told his group, his new glasses glinting under the fluorescent lights, we're not just looking for jobs. We're reclaiming our dignity, our place in the community. Marcus spent hours coordinating with Eleanor through secure channels Sarah had established years ago. The building's cleaning schedule, security patrol patterns, and server room access protocols were mapped out with meticulous detail. Your mother thought of everything, Marcus told Tommy as they reviewed the plans. She even left Eleanor instructions about which security cameras could be trusted and which ones had been compromised. Patricia worked with her legal team to ensure everything about the job fair appeared legitimate. We've received confirmation from 15 major companies, she reported during their evening meeting, including 3 board members from the group we're investigating. They can't resist the positive publicity. Perfect, Alexander nodded. The more of them that attend, the less likely they are to notice anything suspicious. Their own egos will work against them. Tommy spent time with the children at the center, especially Elena, who had become something of a little sister to him. Her innocent questions often provided surprising insights into their plans. Why do bad people want to look good? She asked one afternoon while coloring. Tommy thought about it. Sometimes, he answered, people spend so much time pretending to be good that they forget how to be good for real. Like wearing a mask for too long, Elena suggested. Exactly. Tommy smiled, her words giving him an idea. He rushed to find Marcus and the others. We need to invite the media, he announced breathlessly. Not just local news, national coverage. Make it so big they have to maintain their charitable image throughout the entire event. Alexander's eyes lit up with understanding. The bigger the spotlight, the harder it is for them to watch the shadows, James finished, recognizing Sarah's strategy in his son's thinking. Clara had been coordinating with Rebecca to prepare their network of allies. Each person who had received part of Sarah's evidence was carefully contacted and brought into the plan. Some would attend the job fair as candidates, others as volunteers, each playing their part in the carefully choreographed operation. Sarah always said that true power lies in unity, Clara remarked, watching the growing crowd of volunteers. She built this network knowing that someday all these separate pieces would come together. The golden credit card continued to play, Its part, funding necessary supplies and support services that made their plan possible. Each transaction was carefully documented, creating a public record of legitimate charitable work that helped mask their deeper purpose. As the day of the job fair approached, Tommy noticed increased security around their community centers. Unmarked cars appeared more frequently, and unfamiliar faces lingered too long in their corridors. "They're watching us," he told his father one evening. "Good," James replied, surprising him. "Let them watch. Everything they see is exactly what we want them to see." Marcus had developed a close friendship with Tommy. Their initial antagonism transformed into deep mutual respect. One afternoon, he found Tommy in the center's library, reading Sarah's notebook for the 100th time. "You know what I've realized," Marcus said, sitting beside him. "Your mom didn't just leave us a plan to expose the truth. She left us a blueprint for rebuilding everything they tried to destroy." Tommy nodded, understanding. Each community center they opened strengthened the network of people who had lost everything in the financial scheme. Each person they helped became another thread in the safety net Sarah had envisioned. The night before the job fair, they gathered in the Pike Street Center's main hall. Hundreds of people who had been touched by their initiative, former executives, displaced families, skilled professionals who had lost everything, came together to review their roles in tomorrow's event. Alexander Sterling stood before them, his usual corporate demeanor softened by weeks of working alongside those he once viewed from a distance. "Tomorrow isn't just about finding jobs or exposing truth," he told the crowd. "It's about showing that community is stronger than greed, that hope is more powerful than fear." James wrapped an arm around Tommy's shoulders as they watched the crowd's determined faces. "Your mother would be so proud," he whispered, "not just of what we're about to do, but of who you've become." Tommy fingered the golden credit card in his pocket, the simple object that had started everything. Mum knew that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest acts of kindness. As the meeting concluded and people began heading home to rest for tomorrow's events, none of them could have guessed that across the city, in a darkened boardroom, their opponents were also gathering. The same executives who had orchestrated the original scheme were meeting in emergency session, aware that something was happening but unable to see the full scope of what was coming. Their carefully constructed world of power and privilege was about to meet its match in the most unexpected form, a network of people who had lost everything except their dignity and determination to make things right. The morning of the job fair dawned with an electric energy in the air. The financial district's tallest building, usually a fortress of corporate power, had been transformed. Its marble lobby now hosted registration tables staffed by volunteers from the community centers, while its conference floors buzzed with activity. Tommy stood beside Marcus near the main entrance, watching the steady stream of people arriving. Job seekers dressed in their best clothing, some borrowed, some purchased with help from the Golden Card Initiative, filled the lobby with nervous energy and cautious hope. "Everything's in position," Marcus whispered, pretending to check his tablet. "Eleanor started her morning cleaning rounds 10 minutes ago. The server room is on her schedule for 11 a.m. Tommy nodded slightly, his eyes scanning the crowd. He recognized many faces. Mr. Chen helping people with last-minute resume adjustments, Mrs. Rodriguez directing traffic flow with professional efficiency, and Rebecca coordinating with the press at the media check-in desk. The news cameras were everywhere, just as they'd planned. Local and national reporters circulated through the lobby, capturing what appeared to be a heartwarming story of corporate philanthropy and community revival. Alexander Sterling stood before them, delivering perfectly crafted sound bites about second chances and community responsibility. "This initiative," he told the cameras, "represents everything Sterling Enterprises stands for: creating opportunities and rebuilding lives." Behind the scenes, Clara and Patricia moved through the crowd with purpose, each interaction carefully choreographed. They were the conductors of this intricate symphony, ensuring every participant knew their role in what was about to unfold. Shortly before 10 a.m., the elevator doors opened to reveal several board members from the companies they were investigating. They moved through the lobby with practiced smiles, playing their parts as benevolent corporate leaders perfectly. unaware they were walking into the very trap Sarah had begun setting years ago. "Tommy," James appeared beside his son, his voice low. "Elena's mother just signaled from the security desk. Our friends in the parking garage are in position." Tommy felt the weight of the golden credit card in his pocket, the key that had unlocked all of this. What had started as a simple test of character had grown into something far larger than anyone could have imagined. The job fair officially opened at 10 a.m. The building's large conference rooms had been divided into sections: resume reviews, interview practice, skills assessments, and actual job interviews with legitimate companies who had joined their cause. After learning the truth about what had happened years ago, Marcus orchestrated the flow of people masterfully, ensuring the building's security remained focused on managing the crowds and protecting the high-profile corporate attendees. No one noticed Eleanor's methodical progress through her cleaning schedule or the small device concealed in her cleaning cart. At 10:45, Tommy approached one of the corporate board members, a tall woman named Victoria Pierce, who had been instrumental in the original scheme. "Excuse me, Miss Pierce," he said politely, playing the role of an innocent child. "Could you tell me about your company's community outreach programs?" Victoria Pierce's practiced smile didn't quite reach her eyes as she began describing various charitable initiatives. Tommy listened attentively, asking questions that kept her engaged and distracted. Across the room, Eleanor's cleaning cart disappeared down a restricted hallway. "You remind me of someone," Victoria said suddenly, studying Tommy's face. "There's something familiar about your eyes." Before she could pursue that thought, Marcus appeared with a group of reporters. "Ms. Pierce, would you mind sharing your thoughts about today's initiative with the national news?" Tommy slipped away as Victoria turned to the cameras, her moment of recognition lost in the flurry of media attention. He made his way to the temporary command center they'd set up in a small office, where Clara was monitoring Eleanor's progress through the building's security feeds, the ones Sarah had identified as safe. "She's in," Clara whispered, watching Eleanor's careful movements. 12 minutes until the download begins. The job fair continued above, a perfect cover of hope and redemption playing out in full view of the media. Real interviews were conducted, genuine opportunities were created, and lives were actually being changed, exactly as Sarah would have wanted. But beneath this surface of corporate philanthropy, years of carefully hidden evidence were about to come to light. Eleanor's decades of patience, Sarah's intricate planning, and Tommy's Golden Card initiative were all converging in this moment. "Look," James pointed to one of the security feeds. A group of men in expensive suits had just entered the lobby, their expressions tense. "They're starting to sense something's wrong." Tommy watched the newcomers, high-level executives from the companies implicated in Sarah's evidence. They moved through the crowd with barely concealed anxiety, their eyes darting to exits and security cameras. "They're too late," Marcus said softly. "Even if they figure it out now, they can't stop what's already in motion, not with all these cameras and reporters present." Tommy thought about his mother, about how she had orchestrated all of this years ago. She had known that the truth would need more than just evidence to come to light. It would need a stage where that truth could be heard and hearts ready to receive it. The Golden Card had created that stage, building a community strong enough to stand together and face whatever came next. As the clock ticked toward 11 a.m., Tommy realized that they weren't just exposing a financial scandal. They were demonstrating the power of unity, hope, and unconditional love. Above them, the job fair continued its choreographed dance of opportunity and redemption. Below, Eleanor reached her destination, ready to retrieve the final pieces of Sarah's puzzle. And throughout the building, a network of people who had lost everything stood ready to reclaim not just their futures, but their faith in justice. At exactly 11 a.m., Eleanor began the download. In the command center, Clara watched the progress bar inch forward on her secure laptop. Each percentage represented years of carefully gathered evidence finally coming to light. Meanwhile, the job fair had reached its peak activity. Alexander Sterling was leading a panel discussion about corporate responsibility and community investment, keeping all eyes focused on the main conference room. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved in their plan. The very people they were, Investigating were now trapped in their own public performance of goodwill. 5 minutes until the download completes, Clara announced quietly. Everything's running exactly as Sarah planned. Tommy watched the security feeds, noting the increasing agitation among certain executives. Victoria Pierce was making urgent phone calls from a corner, while others huddled in small groups, their forced smiles slipping as they checked their phones repeatedly. They know something's happening, Marcus observed, but they can't figure out what or where. Suddenly, an alert flashed on Clara's screen. Someone's trying to access the secure server room through a different entrance, she warned. They must have gotten suspicious about Eleanor's cleaning schedule. Tommy's heart raced, but years of living on the streets had taught him to think quickly under pressure. Dad, remember what Mom wrote in her notebook about the building's maintenance systems? James's eyes lit up with understanding. The climate control override. Sarah made sure Eleanor had access to it. With a few quick commands, Clara activated the protocol Sarah had left in place. Throughout the upper floors of the building, the temperature began to rise steadily. Within minutes, the crowded conference rooms became uncomfortably warm. Ladies and gentlemen, Alexander announced smoothly, it appears we're having some technical difficulties with our air conditioning. Please proceed to the lower floors where we've set up additional interview spaces. The crowd began to move, creating exactly the kind of controlled chaos they needed. Security personnel were fully occupied managing the relocation, while maintenance teams were dispatched to check the temperature controls, drawing attention away from the server room. Download complete, Clara announced with quiet triumph. Eleanor's heading out through the predetermined route. Tommy watched on the security feed as Eleanor pushed her cleaning cart into a service elevator, the precious data secure in a device disguised as ordinary cleaning supplies. Years of patience and preparation had paid off in these crucial minutes, but their plan wasn't finished yet. As the crowd settled into the lower floors, Tommy gave Marcus the signal they'd discussed. It was time for the final act. Marcus approached the media coordinator, whispering something that sent the reporters into immediate action. Camera crews began setting up for what they believed would be a major announcement about the job fair's success. Ladies and gentlemen, Alexander Sterling took the podium, his presence commanding attention. Today's event has been about more than just job opportunities. It's about justice, truth, and the power of community. As he spoke, large screens throughout the lobby came to life. Clara, following their carefully orchestrated plan, began displaying selected pieces of evidence from Eleanor's download, financial records, emails, and documents that told the story of corporate corruption and systematic destruction of people's lives. The reaction was immediate. Camera flashes erupted as reporters realized they were witnessing something much bigger than a charitable event. Victoria Pierce and her associates moved toward the exits, only to find their paths blocked by security personnel who had been quietly replaced with members of their own network. Everything you're seeing, Alexander continued, his voice steady, has been verified by multiple sources. This evidence reveals a coordinated effort to destroy companies, manipulate markets, and profit from the resulting human suffering. Tommy watched from the sidelines as years of deception began to crumble. He saw Mr. Chen stand taller as the truth about his company's collapse was revealed. He saw Mrs. Rodriguez wipe tears from her eyes as the systematic nature of the housing crisis was exposed. Most importantly, he saw hope replace resignation in the eyes of people who had thought they'd lost everything due to their own failures. James wrapped an arm around his son's shoulders. "Your mother built the foundation," he said softly, "but you, Tommy, you gave people the courage to stand on it." The golden credit card felt warm in Tommy's pocket, no longer just a symbol of wealth, but a reminder that true value lies in how we help others. What had started as a simple test of character had transformed into a catalyst for justice and healing. As the evidence continued to stream across the screens, Tommy noticed Eleanor watching with wide eyes. "Did you help catch the bad guys?" she whispered. Tommy smiled gently. "No, Elena. We just helped good people find their voice and strength again." Outside the building, police vehicles began arriving, not called by building security, but by Patricia's legal team, which had been working with trusted law enforcement officials all along. The entire operation had been coordinated with authorities who had been building their own case for years. The job fair had become something else entirely, a moment of truth and reconciliation, where the power of community and compassion proved stronger than greed and deception. As Tommy watched everything unfold, he realized that his mother's greatest gift hadn't been the evidence she'd hidden, but the lesson she'd taught him. That the strongest force for change is love expressed through action. The days following the job fair brought waves of change that rippled through the city. News coverage was constant, with headlines highlighting not just the corporate scandal, but also the extraordinary network of community support that had made the revelations possible. Tommy and James watched from the Pike Street Center as their story unfolded on multiple channels. The Golden Credit Card Initiative had become a symbol of hope and transformation, inspiring similar programs across the country. "Look at this," Marcus said, bringing them a stack of morning newspapers. "People everywhere are starting their own community support networks. They're calling it the Golden Card Movement." The center had become a hub of activity, with reporters seeking interviews and people arriving from other cities to learn how they could replicate their success. But Tommy remained focused on what mattered most, continuing to help those in need. "We can't stop now," he told the gathered volunteers one morning. "Just because the truth is out doesn't mean everyone's lives are fixed. We still have work to do." Alexander Sterling had thrown the full weight of his corporate resources behind their effort, converting more empty buildings into community centers. The board members involved in the scandal had been removed, replaced by people who understood the true meaning of corporate responsibility. "We're not just rebuilding businesses," Alexander explained to a group of investors. "We're rebuilding trust, and that starts with putting people before profits." Eleanor, finally able to step out of the shadows, had become an invaluable part of their team. Her years of patient observation had given her unique insights into how corporate systems could be reformed to prevent future abuse. Sarah always said that change had to come from both directions, Eleanor shared during a planning meeting. From the top through policy reform and from the ground up through community empowerment. Patricia Chen's legal team worked tirelessly to ensure that justice was served. But rather than focusing solely on punishment, they developed programs for restitution and rehabilitation. Companies involved in the scandal were required to contribute to community development funds and create genuine employment opportunities for those they had harmed. "This is about more than just legal consequences," Patricia explained. "It's about transforming the system that allowed this to happen in the first place." Tommy spent time with the children at the center, especially Eleanor, whose natural curiosity helped him see their work through fresh eyes. "Why do some people change and others don't?" she asked one afternoon while helping sort donations. "Sometimes," Tommy answered thoughtfully, "people need to see what's possible before they can believe in change. That's why we show them instead of just telling them." The Golden Card continued to play its role, but now it was just one tool among many. Local businesses, inspired by the story, began offering their own support, job training, apprenticeships, and genuine opportunities for people to rebuild their lives. Clara and Rebecca worked together to document everything, creating a blueprint for other communities to follow. Sarah's plan wasn't just about exposing the truth, Clara explained. It was about creating a model for sustainable change. One morning, as Tommy helped Mr. Chen set up for a new training program, the elderly accountant shared something surprising. "You know, when I first lost everything, I thought my life was over. But now I realize it was just beginning. I'm helping more people now than I ever did in my corporate office." James watched his son with pride, seeing how he naturally brought out the best in others. The truth about their biological connection had only confirmed what their hearts had always known. Family is about more than blood, it's about choosing to stand together through challenges. Marcus had undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation. The entitled young man who had once looked down on the homeless was now their fiercest advocate, using his privilege and connections to open doors that had previously been closed. "I used to think wealth was about what you could buy," he told a group of business students visiting the center. "Now I understand it's about what you can build together." The community centers had become more than just service providers. They were incubators for social change, where people from all walks of life came together to share skills, support each other, and build something stronger than any corporate tower. "Your mother would be amazed," James told Tommy one evening as they watched the sunset from their new apartment. "She left us a plan to expose the truth, but you've turned it into a movement for lasting change." Tommy fingered the golden card thoughtfully. Mom knew that the truth wasn't enough on its own. People needed to see a better way was possible. That's why she made sure we'd help others while we followed her clues. As the city began healing, Tommy noticed something remarkable. The lines that had once divided people, wealthy and poor, corporate and community, helper and helped, were blurring. In their place, a new understanding was emerging, that true prosperity comes from lifting each other up. The daily news coverage began to shift from focusing on the scandal to highlighting the positive changes emerging from it. Stories of reconciliation, redemption, and community renewal replaced headlines about corporate greed and corruption. "We're not just fixing what was broken," Tommy explained to a reporter. "We're building something better in its place, and we're doing it together." The golden card that had started their journey had become a catalyst for something far more valuable than any amount of money could buy: the restoration of hope, dignity, and community. As Tommy looked out over the city he had helped transform, he realized that his mother's greatest legacy wasn't the evidence she'd hidden, but the belief that love expressed through action could change the world. As autumn turned to winter, the Pike Street Center prepared for its first holiday season. The once abandoned warehouse had been transformed into a beacon of hope, its windows warm with light and its halls filled with the sounds of community in action. Tommy stood in the main hall, helping Elena and other children decorate a massive Christmas tree. Each ornament had been made by someone whose life had been touched by the center, small symbols of personal transformation and hope. "Look what I made." Elena held up a golden paper star. "It's like your special card, but this one's for everyone." Her simple observation captured the essence of how their initiative had evolved. What had started with one golden card had multiplied into countless acts of kindness and support, each person adding their own light to the growing constellation of change. Marcus arrived with exciting news from the latest board meeting. "We've secured funding for 3 more centers in other cities," he announced. "Teams from each location will come here for training before launching their own programs." The expansion wasn't just about replicating services, it was about spreading a new model of community development. Each new center would adapt to its local needs while maintaining the core principles that had made their initiative successful. "Sarah would have loved this," Clara remarked, watching a group of former executives teaching computer skills to elderly residents. She knew that true healing would require bringing people together across all the barriers society creates. The evidence they'd uncovered had led to more than just legal consequences. It had sparked a nationwide conversation about corporate responsibility and community investment. Alexander Sterling had become a leading voice in this dialogue, using his influence to promote genuine reform. "We're rewriting the rules of business," he explained during a television interview. "Success isn't just measured in profits anymore, but in the positive impact we have on people's lives." James had found his own way to contribute, working with Patricia's legal team to develop programs that helped other families recover from corporate fraud. His experience on both sides of the wealth divide gave him unique insights into how to bridge these worlds. "Every story of recovery," he told a support group, "becomes a light showing others the way forward." Tommy continued using the golden card, but its purpose had evolved. Instead of just providing immediate help, it now served as seed funding for community initiatives. People who had received help were empowered to help others, creating a sustainable cycle of support. One morning, Mr. Chen shared an observation that captured their journey perfectly. "In my years as an accountant," he said, adjusting his glasses, "I tracked wealth in numbers. Now I see it in relationships, in restored dignity, in people helping each other stand tall again." The center's job training programs had evolved beyond basic skills. They now included courses in social entrepreneurship, community organizing, and sustainable development. People weren't just finding jobs, they were creating new opportunities for others. "This is what Mom meant about breadcrumbs," Tommy explained to Elena as they finished decorating the tree. "Each person who finds their way forward leaves signs to help the next person follow." Rebecca and Mrs. Rodriguez had developed a mentorship program matching experienced professionals with newcomers to the center. The exchange of knowledge went both ways. Executives learned about resilience and adaptability from those who had survived on the streets, while sharing their professional expertise in return. "We're not just rebuilding careers," Mrs. Rodriguez explained to a new group of mentors. "We're rebuilding belief in what's possible when people support each other." Eleanor had begun training other whistleblowers, teaching them how to document corporate misconduct while building support networks to protect themselves and others. Her years of patient observation had become a valuable curriculum in ethical vigilance and community protection. As winter settled over the city, the changes they'd sparked continued to grow. Other corporations, inspired by Sterling Enterprises' transformation, began their own community investment programs. But Tommy made sure they understood the key difference. "It's not about charity," he explained to a group of corporate leaders touring the center. "It's about partnership, about recognizing that every person has value and something to contribute." The golden card that had started their journey now rested in a special display case in the center's lobby. Beside it, a wall of photographs showed the faces of people whose lives had been transformed, not just by the card's purchasing power, but by the community it had helped create. One evening, as snow began falling outside, Tommy and James stood before this wall of faces. Each photograph told a story of transformation, of dignity restored, of hope renewed. "You know what I've learned?" Tommy said softly. "Mom didn't just leave us clues to find the truth. She left us clues to find each other, all of us." James squeezed his son's shoulder, understanding the deeper wisdom in his words. The greatest conspiracy they'd uncovered wasn't the corporate fraud. It was the conspiracy of love that Sarah had set in motion, a carefully planned network of hope that had waited years to bloom. Spring brought new energy to the Pike Street Center. The rooftop garden, once just a dream sketched on paper, now bloomed with vegetables and flowers, tended by community members who had discovered healing in nurturing new life. Tommy spent more time there lately, finding quiet moments between the center's ever-growing activities to reflect on how far they'd come. The garden had been Elena's idea. She'd asked why they couldn't grow their own food like her grandmother used to do. "Sometimes the best ideas come from remembering what we've lost," Tommy had told the planning committee, "and then finding ways to bring it back, not just for ourselves but for everyone." The garden became more than just a source of fresh produce. It was a living symbol of their philosophy, that with proper care and support, beautiful things could grow in unexpected places. Marcus joined Tommy one morning, bringing news from their expanding network. "The Seattle Center opens next week," he reported, leaning against the garden railing. "And Chicago's asking for help setting up their program. Your mom's blueprint is spreading faster than we imagined." They had refined Sarah's model, adapting it to different communities while maintaining its core principles. Each new center was unique, shaped by local needs, but all shared the same foundation of dignity, empowerment, and mutual support. "Look at this," Marcus continued, showing Tommy his tablet. The screen displayed photos from centers across the country, people who had once been divided by circumstances now working together, learning from each other, building something new. Down in the main hall, James was meeting with a group of corporate leaders who had come to learn about their model of community investment. These weren't the same executives who had once looked down on their initiative. These were people who had recognized the need for genuine change. The golden card didn't just give people access to resources, James explained to his attentive audience. It gave them back their dignity, their sense of worth, and that's something you can't put a price on. Clara had developed a comprehensive training program for new centers, incorporating lessons they'd learned along the way. Sarah's plan was like a seed, she told her trainees. It needed the right conditions to grow: trust, patience, and most importantly, love. The center's success had attracted attention from academics and social scientists, eager to study what they called the golden card phenomenon. But Tommy knew the real magic wasn't in the card itself. It was in the way it had helped people rediscover their connection to each other. Eleanor, now heading their corporate accountability program, had become a respected voice in business ethics. Change doesn't just happen from the top down or bottom up, she explained during a workshop. It happens when people at all levels recognize their power to make a difference. The afternoon found Tommy helping Mr. Chen with a new initiative, a mentorship program pairing retired professionals with young people from the community. The elderly accountant had discovered a talent for bridging generations, helping young and old see the value in each other's perspectives. "You see, Tommy," Mr. Chen said, adjusting his glasses, "what your mother understood was that everyone has something to teach and something to learn. We just need the right environment to share it." Patricia's legal team had expanded their work beyond just corporate accountability. They now provided comprehensive support for communities working to protect themselves from exploitation, using lessons learned from Sarah's meticulous documentation. "The law is important," Patricia told a group of community advocates, "but it's the relationships we build that create lasting change." As evening approached, Tommy found Eleanor in the garden, carefully tending to a patch of sunflowers she had planted. "Why do you like these ones best?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "Because they always face the sun," she replied wisely. "Even on cloudy days, they remember where the light is." Her words struck Tommy deeply. Wasn't that exactly what they were all doing? Helping people remember their inner light even when circumstances clouded their view. Back in his office, Tommy discovered a new batch of letters from people whose lives had been touched by their initiative. One in particular caught his eye, a photograph of a family standing proud in front of their new small business, funded through their community investment program. "Dear Tommy," the letter read, "your mother's legacy isn't just in the truth she helped uncover. It's in showing us that love is stronger than fear, that community is more powerful than greed. We're not just rebuilding our lives, we're building a new way of living." James found his son reading the letters, tears glistening in his eyes. "You okay, buddy?" "Yeah," Tommy smiled, holding up the photo. "Just thinking about how Mom's breadcrumbs led to all of this. She must have known that once people remembered how to care for each other, everything else would follow." Outside their window, the city skyline sparkled in the gathering dusk. The same buildings that had once symbolized corporate power now held different meaning. They were lighthouses of possibility, beacons showing that change was possible when people dared to imagine something better. As father and son stood together, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the garden in gold, they felt Sarah's presence more strongly than ever. She hadn't just left them a plan to expose corruption, she had given them a blueprint for rebuilding hope, one relationship at a time. The golden card that had started their journey now represented something far more precious than unlimited credit. It was a reminder that the most valuable currency isn't money. It's the trust, love, and connection that grow when people choose to believe in each other's worth. 1 year had passed since Tommy first found the golden card on that fateful morning. The Pike Street Center was hosting a special celebration, bringing together people from all walks of life who had been touched by their initiative. The main hall buzzed with activity as people shared stories of transformation. Mr. Chen, now director of their financial literacy program, stood proudly with his newest class of graduates. Mrs. Rodriguez, recently promoted to operations manager, efficiently coordinated the event while mentoring her own team of staff. "Sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed," Elena said, helping Tommy arrange photos for a special display. They were creating a timeline of the center's evolution, from its beginnings as an abandoned warehouse to its current status as a model for community transformation. Marcus arrived early, bringing a surprise guest, his father's former driver who had witnessed Tommy's first act of honesty that day with the credit card. "I knew something special was happening," the driver shared, "but I never imagined it would lead to all this." The celebration wasn't just about looking back, it was about looking forward. Representatives from new centers across the country had gathered to share their experiences and learn from each other. Each location had adapted the model to their community's needs while maintaining the core principles that made it work. The beautiful thing, Alexander Sterling addressed the gathering, is how each center develops its own personality while staying true to the fundamental vision that every person has value and, given the right support, can help create positive change. Clara and Rebecca had prepared a special presentation documenting the ripple effects of their initiative. Beyond the direct impact of services provided, they had tracked how the program had influenced corporate policies, inspired new legislation, and changed public perception about community development. Sarah's plan was like a pebble in a pond, Clara explained, showing maps of how their influence had spread. The ripples just keep growing, touching lives in ways we never expected. Tommy watched from the side as James shared their story with newcomers to the program. His father's voice carried the wisdom of experience as he explained how their journey had transformed not just their lives, but their understanding of what wealth truly means. "The golden card opened doors," James said, "but it was the relationships we built that created lasting change. Money can buy opportunities, but only love can turn those opportunities into transformation." Patricia's legal team had set up an information booth, offering guidance to other communities wanting to protect themselves from corporate exploitation. But their focus wasn't on fighting old battles, it was on creating new models of business that prioritized human dignity and community well-being. Eleanor, surrounded by her team of corporate accountability specialists, shared insights from their ongoing work. "We're not just preventing abuse," she explained. "We're showing there's a better way to do business, one that benefits everyone." As evening approached, Tommy found himself back in the rooftop garden. The sunflowers Elena had planted now stood tall, their faces turned toward the setting sun. Among them, new seedlings were sprouting, the next generation of growth, nurtured by those who had come before. "Your mother would be so proud," a voice said softly. Tommy turned to find Clara joining him at the railing. "She laid the groundwork, but you and James took it further than she could have imagined." The city spread out before them, its skyline softened by the golden light of sunset. In many of those buildings, people who had once been part of the problem were now actively working for positive change, inspired by the example set at Pike Street. "You know what I've learned?" Tommy said thoughtfully. "Mom didn't just leave us a trail to follow, she left us a choice about who we wanted to be and what we wanted to create." Down in the main hall, the celebration continued. People who had once been strangers now embraced as family. Children who had known only instability were growing up in a community that believed in their potential. Former executives who had lost everything had found new purpose in helping others rebuild their lives. Marcus appeared in the garden doorway. "They're ready for the special announcement," he called out excitedly. Tommy smiled, knowing what was coming. They had spent weeks preparing for this moment, the launch of their newest initiative, one that would take Sarah's vision even further. As he followed Marcus downstairs, Tommy felt the weight of the golden card in his pocket. It was no longer just a symbol of unlimited credit. It had become a reminder that the most valuable things in life can't be bought. They have to be built, one relationship at a time, through acts of love, trust, and unwavering belief in human dignity. The gathered crowd fell quiet as Tommy approached the podium, ready to share their vision for the future. In that moment, he felt more than just his father's proud gaze or the supportive presence of their extended community. He felt his mother's spirit, alive in every person whose life had been touched by her legacy of love. The main hall fell silent. As Tommy stood at the podium, the golden card catching the light as he placed it on the wooden surface. Behind him, James and Alexander Sterling stood proudly, while Marcus managed the audio-visual presentation they had prepared. "A year ago," Tommy began, his young voice carrying clearly through the space, "I found a golden card on the street, but what I really found was a chance to show that kindness is stronger than greed, that community is more powerful than corruption." The screens behind him came to life, showing images from their journey. The first community center, faces transformed by hope, gardens growing where there had once been only concrete. "Today," Tommy continued, "we're taking the next step. The Golden Card Foundation will now become a national organization, with a mission to create lasting change in communities across the country. Alexander Sterling stepped forward to explain the details. Through a combination of corporate reform, community investment, and innovative social programs, they would expand their model while maintaining its core principles. "We're not just offering help," Alexander explained. "We're offering partnership. Every community that joins our network will receive not just funding, but the tools and support to create their own sustainable transformation." Clara presented the data they had gathered over the past year: employment rates, housing stability, educational achievements, and most importantly, the strengthening of community bonds. The numbers told a story of remarkable change, but it was the personal testimonials that brought tears to many eyes. Mr. Chen spoke about the ripple effects of their financial literacy program. When people understand money as a tool for community building rather than personal gain, everything changes. We're not just teaching numbers, we're teaching values. Mrs. Rodriguez shared how their employment program had evolved beyond job placement to career development and entrepreneurship support. "We don't just help people find jobs," she explained. "We help them discover their purpose." The announcement included several groundbreaking initiatives. The first was a partnership with major universities to study and document their model of community transformation. The second was a corporate reform program, helping companies transition to more ethical and community-oriented practices. "But the most important announcement," Tommy said, returning to the podium, "is about the future of the Golden Card itself." He held up the card that had started everything. "This card was meant to test my character, to see what I would do with unlimited resources. Today we're transforming it into something more. The Golden Card program will now offer support to communities ready to create their own centers, but with a special condition." Marcus stepped forward with a digital presentation. "Each community that receives funding must commit to helping another community within 1 year. The goal isn't just to spread resources, it's to spread the understanding that we're all connected." Patricia Chen outlined the legal framework they had developed to protect and support this expanding network. "We've created a structure that ensures transparency, accountability, and most importantly, maintains the focus on human dignity and community empowerment." Eleanor presented their new corporate accountability measures. "Companies that partner with us must commit to real change in their practices, their values, and their relationship with communities. We're not just preventing exploitation, we're creating a new model of business." The audience listened intently as Tommy explained how communities could apply to join the network. The requirements weren't about financial metrics or organizational size. They focused on commitment to principles of dignity, mutual support, and sustainable change. "My mom left us breadcrumbs to find the truth," Tommy said, his voice strong with emotion. "Now we're leaving pathways for others to find their way to transformation." Elena, sitting in the front row, raised her hand with a question that captured the heart of their mission. "Does this mean more gardens, more places where people can grow hope?" Tommy smiled at her simple but profound understanding. "Yes, Elena. More gardens, more classrooms, more opportunities, but most importantly, more connections between people who want to make things better." James watched his son with pride, seeing Sarah's wisdom and compassion living on through Tommy's leadership. The boy who had once struggled to survive on the streets was now helping create a nationwide movement for positive change. As the presentation concluded, the hall erupted in applause. Representatives from other cities immediately began discussing how they could implement these ideas in their own communities. The energy was electric with possibility, but it was the quiet conversations that followed that truly showed the impact of their announcement. People from different backgrounds who would never have met if not for this initiative, sharing dreams and making plans to work together. "This is what Mom meant about love being stronger than fear," Tommy told his father, as they watched the interactions. "When people remember they're connected, they stop being afraid of each other." Above them, through the skylights, stars began to appear in the evening sky. The same stars that had watched over Tommy and James during their nights on the streets now witnessed their transformation into leaders of positive change. The golden card that had started their journey caught these starlit reflections. seeming to pulse with new purpose. It was no longer just a symbol of wealth or generosity. It had become a beacon of possibility, showing that when people choose love over fear, remarkable transformations become possible. The days following the announcement brought a flood of responses from across the country. The Pike Street Centre's phones rang constantly with calls from communities eager to learn more about joining their network. But it was the personal stories that touched them most deeply. Tommy spent morning after morning reading letters from people who had been inspired by their journey. One particular message from a small town in the Midwest captured the spirit of what they hoped to achieve. "We don't have much," the letter read, "but after hearing your story, we realized we have each other. Yesterday, our community held its first meeting to discuss starting our own center. People who hadn't spoken to each other in years sat down together to plan for our future. Marcus had taken charge of organizing the first wave of expansion. His office walls were covered with maps showing potential locations for new centers, each pin representing a community ready to embrace change. "Look at this," he told Tommy, pointing to clusters of interest forming across the country. "It's like watching hope spread in real time." The corporate world was responding too. Companies that had once prioritized profits above all else were reaching out to learn about their model of ethical business practices. Alexander Sterling's phone buzzed constantly with calls from CEOs seeking guidance on genuine corporate reform. "They're finally understanding," Alexander told a gathering of business leaders, "that true success comes from lifting up communities, not exploiting them." Clara and Rebecca worked tirelessly to document their methodology, creating comprehensive guides for new communities joining their network. But they emphasized that each location needed to adapt the model to their unique circumstances. "The principles remain the same," Clara explained during a training session, "but the expression of those principles should reflect each community's culture and needs." Elena had become something of a mascot for their movement. Her simple questions often cut through complexity to reveal essential truths. During a planning meeting for new centers, she asked, "If we're all helping each other, does that mean the helping never ends?" "That's exactly right," Tommy replied, realizing once again how children often grasp the heart of matters, adults complicated. It creates a circle of continuous support and growth. James found himself mentoring other parents who had faced similar struggles. His experience of maintaining dignity through hardship, combined with his journey to recovery and purpose, offered hope to families facing their own challenges. "The hardest part," he told them, "isn't surviving difficult times. It's believing that better times are possible. But when we stand together, that belief becomes stronger." Mr. Chen's financial literacy program had caught the attention of educational institutions. Universities were studying how his approach of combining practical skills with ethical principles was creating lasting change in people's relationship with money. "We're not just teaching people to manage money," he explained to a group of educators. "We're teaching them to manage hope, to invest in each other's potential." Patricia's legal team had begun working with lawmakers to create legislation supporting community-based development initiatives. They were turning their experience into policy recommendations that could protect and empower other communities. "The law should serve people," she testified at a congressional hearing, "not just regulate them. We're showing how legal frameworks can support community transformation." As evening fell on another busy day, Tommy found himself back in the rooftop garden. Eleanor's sunflowers had inspired similar gardens at other centers, each one a symbol of resilience and growth. He thought about how his mother's plan had evolved beyond exposing truth to creating new possibilities. James joined him, carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate, a luxury they now could enjoy regularly but never took for granted. "Penny, for your thoughts?" "I was just thinking about circles," Tommy said, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "How Mum's breadcrumbs led us to the truth, but also led us to each other. And now we're creating new paths for others to follow." The golden card rested in his pocket, no longer just a symbol of unlimited credit, but a reminder of unlimited possibility when people choose to believe in each other. Its weight felt different now, lighter perhaps, but more significant. Down. In the main hall, Preparations were underway for tomorrow's first training session with representatives from new communities. The space that had once been cold and empty now hummed with purpose and possibility. "You know what's amazing?" Tommy said to his father. "A year ago we were just trying to survive. Now we're helping others thrive." James wrapped an arm around his son's shoulders, both of them watching the city lights come alive. "That's what your mother always believed in, that love doesn't just help us survive, it helps us create something better than what we lost." The stars began appearing above them, the same stars that had watched over their journey from the streets to this moment. But now these stars seemed to shine with new promise, illuminating not just their path, but the paths of countless others who would follow in their footsteps. The autumn air carried a hint of transformation as Tommy stood before a crowd in Chicago, inaugurating their newest community center. This was the 10th opening in 3 months, each one unique, yet connected to the growing network of hope they had created. "Every center is like a new chapter in our story," Tommy told the gathered crowd, his confidence growing with each public appearance. "But the real authors are all of you, writing your own stories of change and renewal." The Chicago Center had once been an abandoned factory. Now its restored brick walls housed classrooms, workshops, and a community kitchen. The rooftop, inspired by Elena's garden back at Pike Street, was already sprouting with fall vegetables and hardy flowers. Marcus, who had flown in for the opening, couldn't help but marvel at how their model had evolved. "Each community adds something new," he observed, watching local artists paint murals in the entrance hall. "They take what we started and make it their own." The Chicago team had developed a unique focus on arts and cultural preservation, alongside their core services. Local musicians taught classes in the afternoons, while elders shared traditional crafts and stories with younger generations. "This is what Mom meant about community," Tommy realized, watching an elderly woman teach a group of children traditional songs. "It's not just about helping people survive, it's about helping cultures and traditions thrive." James had been traveling between centers, sharing their story and helping new locations establish their foundations. He found that his experiences, both the hardships and the transformation, resonated deeply with people everywhere. "Every city has its own challenges," he explained during a training session, "but the principles remain the same: dignity, community, and the belief that everyone has something valuable to contribute." Back at Pike Street, Clara and Rebecca coordinated the growing network from their command center. Maps showed the spreading influence of their initiative, while screens displayed real-time updates from various locations. "Look at these numbers," Clara said excitedly one morning. "The Denver Center just helped 20 families start small businesses. Atlanta's educational program has doubled in size. And Portland's community garden is supplying fresh produce to 3 local schools." The golden card that had started everything now had companions. Each center received its own card, but with the understanding that it was merely a tool for implementing the true currency of their movement: human dignity and community connection. Eleanor, who had become something of an ambassador for the youth programs, shared her wisdom with other children at new centers. "It's like planting seeds," she explained during a video call with kids in Miami. "You have to believe in what you can't see yet." Mr. Chen's financial literacy curriculum had been adopted by all the centers, but each location added cultural context and local knowledge. In Chicago, they incorporated lessons about cooperative economics from the city's rich history of community organizing. "Money is just one kind of wealth," he told a national conference of educators. "What we're really teaching is how to grow community wealth, the kind that multiplies when you share it." Patricia's legal team had expanded, training advocates in each city to protect and support their local centers. They weren't just defending against exploitation anymore, they were actively creating new frameworks for community-driven development. "The law should grow from the ground up," she explained to a group of law students. "It should reflect the wisdom and needs of communities, not just the interests of power." One evening, as Tommy video chatted with leaders from various centers, he noticed something remarkable. People who had once been recipients of help were now running programs, mentoring others, and creating innovations he had never imagined. "It's like watching a garden grow," he told his father later. Each person brings their own gifts, and together they create something more beautiful than any single flower. The corporate world was changing too. Alexander Sterling's example had inspired other business leaders to rethink their approach to community engagement. Companies were starting to understand that genuine investment in people and neighborhoods led to sustainable success. "We're not just changing business practices," Alexander told a gathering of CEOs. "We're changing the very definition of business success." As winter approached, the network prepared for its first national gathering. Representatives from all the centers would come together at Pike Street to share experiences, challenges, and innovations. "Your mother would be amazed," Clara told Tommy as they planned the event. "She left us breadcrumbs to find the truth, but you've created highways of hope connecting entire communities." The evening before leaving for another center opening, Tommy sat in the Pike Street garden with Elena. The sunflowers had gone to seed, but new growth was already visible in the carefully tended beds. "Do you think we'll ever run out of ways to help people?" Elena asked, her innocent question carrying profound weight. Tommy thought about all the transformations he'd witnessed, all the lives touched and changed. "No," he answered thoughtfully, "because every person who finds hope becomes a new source of hope for others. It's like your sunflowers. Each one makes new seeds for next year's garden." The golden card in his pocket seemed to pulse with renewed purpose. What had begun as a test of character had become a catalyst for a movement that was redefining the relationship between wealth, community, and human dignity. As the city lights began to twinkle below them, Tommy and Elena planted bulbs for spring flowers. Each one represented a promise, not just of future blooms, but of the endless potential for growth and renewal when people believe in each other's worth. The national gathering at Pike Street brought together hundreds of people from centers across the country. The main hall, once an empty warehouse, now buzzed with energy as representatives shared stories, strategies, and dreams for the future. Tommy moved through the crowd, listening to conversations in different languages, hearing how each community had adapted their model to local needs while maintaining the core principles that made it work. "In New Mexico," a center director explained, "we've incorporated traditional healing practices alongside modern job training. It's not just about economic recovery, it's about cultural revival." Marcus coordinated a series of workshops where different centers shared their innovations. Miami had developed a microfinance program that helped immigrant families start businesses. Detroit Center had created a technology training partnership with local manufacturers. "Every challenge becomes an opportunity," Marcus told the gathering. "When we trust communities to solve their own problems, they often create solutions we never imagined." James led a session on maintaining dignity through transition, sharing how their experiences on the streets had shaped their understanding of true wealth. "The golden card opened doors," he explained, "but it was belief in each other's worth that built this movement." Mr. Chen presented data showing the ripple effects of their financial literacy program. Beyond individual success stories, entire neighborhoods were seeing reduced debt, increased savings, and most importantly, stronger community bonds. "When people understand money as a tool for community building," he said, adjusting his glasses, "they make different choices. They invest in each other." Eleanor had organized a children's congress where young people from different centers shared their visions for the future. Their artwork covered the walls, drawings of gardens, schools, and communities where no one was left behind. "Kids often see things more clearly," Tommy observed, watching Elena lead a discussion about environmental responsibility. "They understand that helping others isn't just nice, it's necessary for survival." Clara and Rebecca presented their impact assessment, showing how the network had grown beyond their wildest expectations. But it wasn't just the numbers that impressed, it was the quality of connections being built between people and communities. "Sarah's plan was like a seed," Clara told the audience, "but you've all helped grow it into a forest of possibility." Patricia's legal team shared success stories from different cities where community advocacy had led to policy changes protecting vulnerable populations. "The law is beginning to recognize that community well-being is as important as individual rights," she explained. During a break, Tommy found himself in the rooftop garden with representatives from other centers. Each shared stories of how their own gardens had become symbols of renewal and hope. "It's not just about growing food," a woman from Seattle said. "It's about growing belief in what's possible." Alexander Sterling announced new partnerships with companies committed to genuine community investment. "We're not just changing how business operates," he declared. "We're changing why it operates." As the gathering continued, Tommy noticed something remarkable. People who had once been divided by circumstances, corporate executives and former homeless individuals, elderly craftspeople and young tech entrepreneurs, were now working together, learning from each other, creating something new. "This is real wealth," he told his father that evening. "Not what's in our bank accounts, but what's in our connections to each other." The golden card that had started their journey had evolved into something far more valuable, a symbol of what's possible when people choose to believe in each other's potential. As the gathering drew to a close, Elena led everyone in planting a special garden. Each center contributed seeds from their local plants, creating a living tapestry of their connected communities. "When these grow," she explained with childhood wisdom, "they'll be like our network, different flowers making one beautiful garden." Tommy stood at the podium one last time, looking out at the faces of people who had taken their simple start and transformed it into a movement of hope and renewal. "My mom left us breadcrumbs," he said, his voice strong with emotion. "But you've all helped build highways of hope. Every person who finds their way forward becomes a light, helping others find their path." As the sun set on their gathering, the garden glowed with promise. The seeds they had planted, both literal and metaphorical, would continue growing, spreading hope and possibility to more communities, more lives, more futures waiting to bloom. The golden card in Tommy's pocket caught the last rays of sunlight, reminding him of that first morning when he'd found it on the street. What had begun as a test of character had become a testament to the unlimited potential of human hearts connected by compassion and purpose. One quiet evening, as autumn leaves danced past the windows of Pike Street Center, Tommy sat in the library with Elena, looking through a scrapbook of their journey. The pages told a story not just of their own transformation, but of countless lives touched and changed along the way. "Remember when this was all empty?" Elena asked, pointing to a photo of the warehouse before its renovation. "Now it's full of so much life." Tommy nodded, turning pages that showed the progression from that first day to now. Photos of Mr. Chen teaching his first financial literacy class, Mrs. Rodriguez organizing the job fair, and children tending the rooftop garden captured moments of change that had rippled out to affect thousands of lives. Marcus joined them, carrying a tablet with updates from their newest centers. "Seattle just launched their youth entrepreneurship program," he reported excitedly, "and Denver's community kitchen is feeding twice as many families as last month." The success of their network had attracted attention from international organizations interested in replicating their model. Representatives from countries around the world had begun visiting Pike Street to learn how community transformation could grow from a single act of kindness. "It's amazing," Clara remarked, entering with fresh data from their impact assessment. "Each center develops its own unique programs, but they all share the same heart, people helping people believe in themselves again." James watched from the doorway as Tommy showed Elena pictures of their early days on the streets. Those memories, once painful, had become powerful teaching tools, showing others that transformation was possible no matter where you started. "The real miracle," James said, joining them at the table, "isn't just that we found our way forward. It's that we found a way to help others do the same." The library had become a central gathering place for the community. Shelves lined with books donated by supporters shared space with computer stations, where people could access educational programs and connect with other centers. Alexander Sterling arrived for their evening meeting, but paused to watch a group of children doing homework together. "You know what's remarkable?" he said to Tommy. "We thought we were just creating service centers, but we've actually built bridges between worlds that used to be separate." Patricia's legal team had documented how their initiative had influenced policy changes across the country. Communities are stronger when they have both protective frameworks and empowering opportunities, she explained, showing them new legislation inspired by their work. Mr. Chen appeared with his latest group of financial literacy graduates. Each person who learns to manage resources wisely, he said proudly, becomes a teacher for others. The knowledge multiplies naturally. As evening settled over the city, Tommy and James walked through the quiet halls of the center. Photos lined the walls, faces of people who had found new hope, new purpose, new connections through their program. "Mom would love this," Tommy said softly, stopping at a display of thank you letters from around the country. "She left us breadcrumbs to find the truth, but we found so much more." The golden card that had started everything rested in a special display case surrounded by artifacts from their journey. Children often gathered around it, listening to Elena tell the story of how a simple act of honesty had grown into a movement of hope. The card was just the beginning, Elena would tell them. The real magic was in remembering how to care for each other. Up in the rooftop garden, autumn flowers bloomed alongside the last of the summer vegetables. Each plant represented a story of growth and renewal, much like the people who tended them. "Sometimes I wonder," Tommy confided to his father as they looked out over the city, "what would have happened if I had used the card differently that first day?" James smiled, understanding the depth of his son's reflection. "You chose love over fear, honesty over immediate comfort, just like your mother knew you would." The evening light painted the city in soft colors, highlighting the network of centers that had sprung up across the urban landscape. Each location glowed like a beacon, drawing people toward hope and possibility. "We're not just helping people survive anymore," Tommy realized. "We're helping them remember who they really are, valuable, capable, worthy of love and respect." Down in the main hall, preparations were underway for tomorrow's programs. New faces would arrive seeking help, while those who had already found their footing would return to help others. The cycle of giving and receiving had become seamless. Marcus appeared with more updates from their expanding network. "Each center is like a seed growing into its own unique tree," he observed, "but together they're creating a forest of possibility." As night fell, Tommy stood at the window of his office, the same room where he had first shared his vision for using the golden card to help others. The city sprawled before him, its lights twinkling like stars, each one representing a life touched by their growing movement. "The real treasure," he whispered to himself, "wasn't in the card's unlimited credit. It was in helping people discover their unlimited potential to care for each other." The golden card had tested his character that first morning, but it had done so much more. It had become a key unlocking not just resources, but the very best in human nature. The capacity for compassion, the courage to trust, and the power of unconditional love to transform lives. The winter sun cast long shadows through the Pike Street Center's windows as Tommy prepared for a special celebration. 1.5 years had passed since that fateful morning when he'd found the golden card, and today they would honor not just their journey, but the thousands of lives transformed through their growing network of hope. The main hall had been transformed once again, this time filled with representatives from centers across the country. But unlike the previous gathering, today's event focused on the personal stories of transformation that made their work meaningful. Eleanor, now confident in her role as youth ambassador, led a group of children in decorating the space, with artwork representing their dreams for the future. Each piece told a story of hope renewed, of possibilities discovered, of communities united in purpose. "Look at this one," she said to Tommy, pointing to a collaborative mural. Every child added something that reminded them of home, but together it makes one beautiful picture. Marcus arrived early, helping to coordinate the technology that would connect them with centers unable to attend in person. Screens around the hall would allow people from across the country to participate in the celebration. "It's amazing," he remarked, testing the connections. "Remember when we thought success meant having the most money? Now we measure it by how many lives we've touched." Mr. Chen stood proudly with his latest class of financial literacy graduates, but his program had evolved far beyond basic money management. "We teach the economics of community," he explained to a group of visitors, "how investing in each other creates wealth that can't be measured in dollars." James watched the preparations with quiet pride, remembering their days on the streets. The hardships they'd endured had become stepping stones to understanding, helping them create a program that addressed not just immediate needs, but the deeper human yearning for dignity and purpose. "Your mother," he told Tommy softly, "didn't just leave us clues to find the truth. She left us a blueprint for rebuilding hope." Clara and Rebecca had prepared a special presentation documenting the ripple effects of their initiative. Beyond the direct services provided, they tracked how the program had influenced corporate policies, inspired new legislation, and changed public perception about community development. "Each center becomes a catalyst," Clara explained, showing maps of their growing influence. "The changes spread naturally because they're based on real human connections." Alexander Sterling, who had undergone perhaps the most dramatic personal transformation, shared how the experience had changed his understanding of wealth and responsibility. "True prosperity," he told the gathering, "isn't about accumulating resources. It's about circulating them in ways that enrich everyone." Patricia's legal team presented their latest achievement, a comprehensive framework for community-based development that was being adopted by cities across the country. "We're not just protecting rights anymore," she explained. "We're creating new possibilities for how communities can grow together." As evening approached, Tommy stood at the podium, looking out at the faces of people whose lives had become intertwined with their journey. The golden card rested in its display case, a reminder of how a single choice could spark a movement of transformation. "A year and a half ago," he began, his voice strong with conviction, "I found a golden card on the street. But what I really found was a chance to show that love is stronger than fear, that community is more powerful than greed, and that every person has unlimited potential to make a difference." The screens around the hall showed faces from centers across the country, each one representing a story of hope renewed, of dignity restored, of community strengthened through mutual support and understanding. "My mom left us breadcrumbs," Tommy continued, "leading us not just to truth but to each other. She knew that the real treasure wasn't in unlimited credit, but in unlimited capacity for love and connection." Elena joined him at the podium, her presence representing the future they were building together. "The garden teaches us," she added with simple wisdom, "that everything grows better when we help each other grow." As the celebration continued into the evening, Tommy stood in the rooftop garden with his father, watching the city lights twinkle below. The network of centers glowed like stars across the urban landscape, each one a beacon of hope and possibility. "You know what I've learned?" Tommy said softly. "The golden card wasn't really about buying things. It was about believing in what's possible when we choose love over fear, community over isolation." James wrapped an arm around his son's shoulders, both of them feeling Sarah's presence in the gentle winter breeze. "She would be so proud," he whispered, "not just of what we've built, but of who we've become." Below them, the celebration continued, a testament to the power of human connection and the endless possibilities that emerge when people choose to believe in each other's worth. The golden card had tested Tommy's character that first morning, but it had done so much more. It had become a key unlocking the very best in human nature. Spring returned to the city, bringing with it a sense of renewal that seemed to mirror their journey. 2 years had passed since Tommy found the golden card, and the Pike Street Centre was preparing for a very special event, the inauguration of their 100th community centre across the country. The morning dawned bright and clear as Tommy stood in the rooftop garden, now a lush paradise of flowers and vegetables. Eleanor's original sunflowers had multiplied, their seeds spreading hope and beauty across every centre in their network. Each location had its own garden now, a living symbol of growth and renewal. "Remember when we planted the first seeds?" Eleanor asked, joining him among the blooming flowers. Now, 12 years old, she had grown into a passionate advocate for their youth programs. "Everything was so empty then, now look at all this life." Marcus arrived with news that made the morning even more special. "The last group of board members involved in the original scheme has stepped down," he announced. "They're being replaced by community leaders from our programs. The transformation is complete." The corporate world had indeed changed dramatically. Alexander Sterling's example had inspired a new generation of business leaders who understood that true success came from lifting up communities, not exploiting them. "We're seeing a fundamental shift," Alexander explained during their morning meeting. "Companies are competing not just for profits, but for positive impact. They're measuring success by lives improved, not just dollars earned." James watched the morning's activities with quiet pride. The journey that had begun with him and Tommy on the streets had grown into something beyond their wildest dreams. Yet they never forgot their roots. Every new center maintained their core principle of treating each person with dignity and respect. "Your mother," he told Tommy, "didn't just leave us a trail to follow. She gave us a purpose to fulfill." Clara and Rebecca had compiled comprehensive data showing the impact of their initiative. Beyond the numbers, the jobs created, the families housed, the communities revitalized, they tracked the deeper changes in how people related to each other. "What we're seeing," Clara explained, showing their latest findings, "is a restoration of human connection. People aren't just receiving help, they're rediscovering their capacity to help others." Mr. Chen's financial literacy program had evolved into a comprehensive curriculum about community economics. Money is just one form of wealth, he taught his students. True prosperity comes from building relationships and investing in each other's potential. Patricia's legal work had helped create new frameworks for community development across the country. "We're not just protecting rights," she said, reviewing their latest initiatives. "We're creating spaces where rights and responsibilities flow naturally from human connection." As the day progressed, Tommy found himself drawn to the display case where the golden card rested. Its surface still caught the light, but now it seemed to reflect not just sunlight, but the brightness of thousands of transformed lives. The card was just the beginning, he reflected to his father. The real magic was in helping people remember how to care for each other. The afternoon brought a surprise visitor, the security guard who had been working the day Tommy first tried to return the card to Sterling Tower. "I watched you that day," he shared, "and something told me this was different. This wasn't just about doing the right thing, it was about believing in something better." Eleanor had organized a special presentation with children from centers across the country. Through video connections, they shared stories of how their communities had changed, each tale adding another thread to the tapestry of transformation they had woven together. "Every garden starts with one seed," Elena told her young audience. "Every change starts with one choice to believe in something better." The afternoon sun filtered through the skylights, casting rainbow patterns across the main hall where preparations continued for the evening's celebration. The space that had once been cold and empty now pulsed with life and purpose. Tommy stood at the window of his office, the same room where he had first shared his vision for using the golden card to help others. The city spread out before him, its landscape dotted with centers that glowed like beacons of hope. "Mom knew," he said softly to himself, "that love would find a way to bring truth to light. But she also knew that truth without compassion isn't enough. It's how we help each other grow that really matters." Down in the main hall, James watched as new arrivals shared their stories with current participants. The cycle of giving and receiving had become seamless. Each person who found help became a helper, each story of transformation inspiring new possibilities. As evening approached, the center hummed with activity. Representatives from all 100 centers would be connecting virtually for the celebration, creating a nationwide network of hope and possibility. The golden card that had tested Tommy's character that first morning had become something far more valuable, a symbol of what's possible when people choose to believe in each other's worth, when they dare to imagine something better than what they've lost. The sun began to set, painting the sky in colors that seemed to celebrate with them. Tommy and James stood in the rooftop garden, surrounded by the life they had helped nurture, feeling Sarah's presence in the gentle spring breeze. "We did it, Mom," Tommy whispered to the evening sky. "We followed your breadcrumbs and found our way home. But home isn't just a place anymore. It's everywhere people choose to believe in each other." The evening of the 100th Center celebration brought together thousands of people, both in person and through virtual connections. The Pike Street Center's main hall glowed with warmth as screens around the room showed faces from across the country, all part of the incredible network that had grown from one simple act of honesty. Tommy stood at the podium, looking out at the gathered crowd and the countless faces on the screens. Eleanor sat in the front row, surrounded by children from their youth programs. Marcus stood with his father, both men transformed by their journey, from privilege to purpose. James watched proudly from the side, their years of hardship now transformed into wisdom that helped others find their way. 2 years ago, Tommy began, his voice strong and clear, I found a golden card on the street. I was hungry, cold and scared. Using that card could have bought me everything I thought I needed. But my father had taught me that the only thing no one can take from you is your integrity. The screens showed nodding faces from centers across the country, people who had learned the same lesson through their own journeys of transformation. What we didn't know then, Tommy continued, was that my mother had left us more than just breadcrumbs to find the truth. She left us a blueprint for rebuilding hope. She knew that exposing corruption wasn't enough. We needed to create something, a better in its place. Alexander Sterling stepped forward to share how their initiative had transformed the corporate world. We thought wealth was about accumulation, he admitted. Now we understand it's about circulation, about how resources flow through communities to create real prosperity. Clara and Rebecca presented their final impact assessment. Beyond the measurable changes, jobs created, homes secured, education provided, they highlighted the deeper transformation in how communities functioned. What we're seeing, Clara explained, is the restoration of something essential to human flourishing, the belief that we're all connected, that helping others helps ourselves. Mr. Chen stood with graduates from all 100 centers, their success, stories demonstrating how financial literacy combined with community values could create sustainable change. We don't just teach people to manage money, he said, his voice filled with pride. We teach them to manage hope, to invest in each other's potential. Patricia shared how their model had influenced policy changes across the country. The law is beginning to recognize what we've known all along, that community well-being is as important as individual rights. Elena led the children in a special presentation, their young voices sharing dreams for the future that now seemed possible. Every garden needs different flowers, she explained, wise beyond her years. Every community needs different gifts, but together we make something beautiful. As the evening progressed, Tommy revealed their next initiative. The golden card taught us about unlimited resources, he explained. But what we've learned is that the most valuable resource is our unlimited capacity to care for each other. Today, we're launching a new program to help communities discover and share their unique gifts. James joined his son at the podium, their journey from the streets to this moment, a testament to the power of love and integrity. Sarah knew, he said softly, that truth without compassion isn't enough. She left us clues not just to expose what was wrong, but to help us create something right. The screens showed centers across the country, each one a unique expression of their shared vision. Gardens bloomed on rooftops, classrooms buzzed with learning, kitchens provided nourishment for body and soul. Each location had taken their basic model and adapted it to local needs, while maintaining the core principle that every person has value and something to contribute. Marcus shared plans for the next 100 centers, but with a twist. Each new center will be paired with an existing one, he explained, because we've learned that the best way to grow is together. As the celebration continued, Tommy walked through the halls of Pike Street, touching the walls that had witnessed so much transformation. The golden card in its display case caught the evening light, its surface reflecting not just the glow of success, but the warmth of countless hearts united in purpose. Up in the rooftop garden, where Eleanor's first sunflowers had inspired a nationwide movement of hope, Tommy stood with his father under the stars. The city spread out before them, its landscape dotted with centers that glowed like constellations of possibility. Mum would be proud, Tommy said softly, not just of what we've built but of who we've become. James wrapped an arm around his son's shoulders. "She knew that love would find a way," he replied. "Not just to uncover truth, but to rebuild hope." Below them, the celebration continued, a testament to the power of choosing integrity over ease, community over isolation, love over fear. The golden card that had tested Tommy's character that first morning had become something far more precious, a key that unlocked not just resources, but the very best in human nature. As the evening drew to a close, Tommy looked out over the city one last time. The lights of their centers twinkled like stars, each one a reminder that the greatest wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the connections we build, the hope we share, and the love we choose to give freely to others. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered to the night sky, "for showing us that when we follow the breadcrumbs of love, we find our way not just to truth but to each other."